now. You there, guys?
Well, I'm here, but I mean, you
I'm
might.
here.
I'm not sure if it started a new stream or it's back up. Oh, perfect, awesome. Well,
Is
it
it
did look
still
like it
going?
started a stream. It looks like we're live now, but
Okay, good.
it's
Sorry
actually
about that. My internet just went down for a second.
no problem. But it's actually a new stream, second stream.
Oh, is it? Oh, darn. Yeah, I guess it's. Yeah, I guess we could just keep going. I guess my internet just went down for a second. I'm not sure what happened. So, please continue.
Well, no,
Okay,
he was.
Well, we
he
could
was
wrap it up, or we could let Jennifer ask. We were talking about, Vince's, kind of thoughts on race and talking about his Hindus and kind of the trauma of being white or his personal dilemma of, the social repercussions, like being friends with Nazis versus like what is Dharma? What is the Dharma of a white man? Even if you're a Hindu, you still have, presumably some sort of duty, Dharma in the sense of the duty to your racial identity and to the betterment of your racial group. Also your nation state and your religious identity, all your various forms of identity, you presumably fall under some laws of dharma and duty and certain obligations to cause benefit to those other people who are part of those identities.
Yes.
Even if it was like gays or something like that, like or Jewish or religion, any type thing that would have some sort of like, I have a duty dharma to the larger group identity.
Yes. Yeah. If you want, I mean, if you feel that, I guess. Yeah. I feel that I do.
Well, that was my interpretation of your article, and that's why I thought it was interesting that you even read a little bit of what you wrote.
Yeah, no, I know. I mean, it's probably, well, Jews do it. I mean, they worry about their identity, obviously, and that's a good thing, and it works for them. And I mean, I always get into the fight. Judaism's not a race. Judaism, it's not a race, but there's a lot of people of one race that happen to be Jewish. I mean, it's not a race, but still they kind of in a way behave like they are. There's not a lot of outside marriage, at least not in the Orthodox. I mean, unless you're in Reform, then there's a lot of outside marriage, and then those children tend to lose their Jewishness both genetically and spiritually. So the ones that preserve Judaism kind of behave like it's a race. I mean, it's hard to marry into them. Their bloodlines have changed over time due to Oh, Doooovid, you're on mute.
Yeah, well, it was saying that's why I say either way, whether it's racial or there's some sort of group dharma, group strategy, and duties and obligations of part of being that group identity, and whether that could vary in different forms of identity, being your racial, genetic, behavioral, ritualistically, religious, national, political, so on and so on.
Yes, and yes, whites should be doing the same. Whites should be doing the same thing.
White's not really a thing, though, because most people think Jews are white. And there's an article here from Haaretz saying Israel's rabbinical courts begin to recognize DNA tests, potentially opening gateway to proving Jewishness. So clearly there's a genetic component.
No, okay, I disregard that because there was a time, look, every gene that is inside the cluster of most people who are Jewish, that subrace or whatever, all those genes existed before Judaism. They were all pagan genes. One tribe of people some time ago might have converted to Judaism, but that doesn't mean Judaism is a race. Judaism
it's a de facto there's a de facto racial component if they can test you for citizenship in Israel.
No, but
it's an identifiable. It doesn't matter what you're saying because it's an identifiable genetic identity. So whether it's a race or not is a different question, but it's an identifiable genetic identity
It's
that
not.
Jews have
There are
due to
people,
common lineage.
there are people who are Jewish that don't test positive. There are people who are not Jewish who do test positive. So, I mean, that's only because Judaism is not a race. A lot of people of the same race happen to be Jewish, but Judaism is not a race. If it was a race, you could only test in or out of it. You couldn't.
Again, I'm saying it's a common genetic identity.
It's common, but
What
that
you're
doesn't mean it's a
what you're
race.
going to define that common genetic identity as, certainly there is a common genetic identity
I know,
to
but
all
it doesn't
Jewish
work.
people.
It's not genetic. It's not. Okay. The basis of who is a Jew and who is not a Jew is not genetic. Anyone could be a Jew. Anyone could not be a Jew.
There's multiple components to identity, but one of
So what do
obviously
you
a
not
convert
include?
who doesn't have any Jewish blood in them is a Jew without that common Jewish identity. Like we discussed on previous shows, eventually converts marry Jews so that their genetics will become part of the larger Jewish identity. But
I know, but Judaism is a religion. Judaism is a religion. And Judaism is a
also a
religion.
genetic identity. But I mean, it's pointless for us to argue this again and again, week after week.
No, I think what happened was that there's a race, and then there was a religious component, and then they tried to shill that it was a religion to confuse people, basically.
Yeah.
And now it's
There's
so
multiple
obvious that
facets
it's a
to
race
identity.
that they can't really deny it anymore.
It doesn't have to be one or the other. There's multiple facets to identity.
I know, but it's either look, you can either the genes, if it was what you're saying, you couldn't become and when you leave and you become an apostate, you're no longer a Jew. You might have the genetics, but at least according to the Talmud, you're no longer a Jew. If you become an apostate, you're not. I mean, the problem is that modern Jews say, well,
I don't get what you're rambling on about. I mean, there's multiple facets of identity. You could be excommunicated.
Rambling on. You're very snide with me. All of a sudden, I don't think what I just said was rambling. I said that apostasy
was rambling because you've said these things on previous weeks.
No, we haven't talked about apostasy in the Talmud. I have a very good memory, and we haven't talked about apostasy in the Talmud being a reason why Judaism is not genetic, because those people still have Jewish genetics, yet they're no longer Jewish. Okay, if it was a race, we wouldn't have all these exceptions all over the place. I mean, I don't. You know what? I'm gonna get off the stream because I just think you're being a fucking asshole to me, and that's it. So thank you for having me on. I'm sorry for being so insignificant for you and getting all whatever, but I'm sure you're not gonna.
Thanks for joining the show, Vincent. We appreciated having you on. Apologies that didn't go better.
Vince, I just kind of wanted to keep moving on a certain topical way, but I guess I wasn't able to do that in a way that didn't cause conflict.
Yeah.
Kind of like Claire type, kind of like ramble where everything was going back to his talking point. So I wanted to keep it moving, talking about certain topics, and try to encourage him not to just repeat his talking points. And I guess when I called him out on that, he felt insulted, and I apologize about that. But at the same time, the show's got to go on, and we got to keep on moving.
Okay, Doovid, did you want to go over those quantum mechanical slides that you mentioned?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I actually had. Let me show these books real quick, and I thought I'd even have Vince on, because there was other stuff I wanted to talk about without getting mired down, and what I thought was not the focus that I wanted the show to be on. So hopefully, there's no hard feelings with Vince. So here is. This is the fifth canto. This is special commentary of the fifth canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. And if you're, ISKCON, this is like the most holy of the Vedic text, although, that's obviously a minority school. And this comes, the newer Vedas from Vyasudev, who heard directly from Krishna. And this is, in the fifth canto, explains the orders of the cosmos and the cosmology of the Vedas. There might be other older Vedas that have slightly different.
Well, there's only 4 Vedas. Everything else is not considered authoritative. So Is this actually a Veda or is this something else?
Well, ISKCON would consider it a Veda, but no, I mean from the
Right,
classical.
but they're not authoritative, right? Because they're
Well,
grifters.
there's a Sampradaya.
right?
No, I mean ISKCON is a Sampradaya.
It's not accepted by any legitimate authority as a Vedically, quote unquote kosher tradition whatsoever. They would take issue with the degree of Abrahamization it would have. So,
I mean, this.
I don't know why you always have to invoke the Veda as though it gives your positions more authority. Like there's only 4 Vedas. That's it. There's nothing else. Everything else is derivative.
Doctrine. If you went into an ISKCON,
no, it's not my doctrine. It's a fact.
They would use the word Veda. If just like Vince was bringing up, like the chief rabbi. So so to say, like the Hinduization of India, how they interpret all these varying schools. In what you're going to have, like an orthodoxy of what you consider Veda, what you don't. But the Sampradaya of ISKCON is certainly accepted. Among most Hindus, that the Sampradaya.
Well, I think it's accepted among the Jews who run it. That's probably who accepts it, but I don't know about the average Hindu. If they knew about Jews running it, if they would agree with ISKCON.
But the Sampradaya, so even if there's Jews involved, it doesn't change the fact that the Sampradaya goes back.
I think it does change it, though, quite a bit, because every time Jews get involved with stuff, it changes it quite a bit. So, nobody who's actually in a Vedic lineage is going to look at ISKCON and think, yeah, this is great. They're going to think, well, why are they focusing so much on the Bhagavad Gita and nothing else, right?
Well, they don't. They focus on the Bhagavatam, not the Bhagavad Gita. I mean, the focus of ISKCON, I mean, people learn the Bhagavad Gita, but the focus is on the Bhagavatam, not the Bhagavad Gita. And, whatever status you hold the Bhagavatam in, we could debate that at a different time. And, if according to your understanding, you don't want that to be included in the Veda, that's understandable. It's like calling Talmud Torah. You're saying like Talmud is not prophecy. It's not on the same level as scripture. But if you're, in some level, it's all Torah. So, whatever, there is the Bhagavatam. This is considered authoritative, that it was spoken, by, it was the testimony of Vayasudeva, who was a student of Krishna, who had personal association with Krishna. So
I just looked it up. It says the Bhagavata Purana. Is that it? Srimad Bhagavatam, one of Hinduism's 18 great Puranas. Yeah, so Puranas are derivative. They're not Vedic. So anyone who's saying that Puranas are Vedic just doesn't understand anything.
Yeah, and the term has dual meaning. So you're saying like capital V.
It really doesn't. Like, I think you want it to have 2 meanings, but it only has 1. So it's a bit strange that you think that I'm going to buy this, because I'm just not going to do. I mean, you know what I believe.
Well, I know what you believe, but that's why we use
right. And I'm the one who's going to be recognized as the expert, not you, not ISKCON, right? Like, whose opinion matters in this? Bunch of Jews running ISKCON? Is that whose opinion matters in all this, or actual people in Vedic lineages?
If you're looking for an authoritative answer, you could go about your approaches for finding one. But if you're just trying to understand how people use language, your authoritative ruling is not going to change the way that people use language.
I think some people might disagree with that, but okay.
That despite a lot of people, whatever you're saying, like this is the fact, it doesn't change the fact that people still use the expression of Veda to refer to a lot of things other than just a handful of scriptures.
Well, it's heretical to do that, but if they want to be heretics to the Orthodox Vedic religion, they're more than welcome to do that. But they should actually read these Puranic stories to see what happens when people do that.
I would fully disagree with you, because Veda does not mean authoritative scripture. Veda means knowledge. So you're saying
that
Veda
is correct. And there's 4 of them. There are 4 Vedas and no more. Everything else is commentary.
Authoritative scripture, but it also refers to all knowledge in general.
Okay, but there's only 4 Vedas, and to call other stuff the Veda is not really true, is it?
I think you're misusing the word, because
one of us is. But I wonder who is
Veda
actually
does
the
not mean
authority. I wonder who
authoritative
is a
scripture.
recognized authority on Veda with relevant with relevant authorities. It's a question of who's the relevant
You can't
authority.
recognize yourself. You have to be
I
recognized.
am not
by
talking
people.
about my own judgments on my teachings. I'm talking about what Brahmins have said about my teachings. And a great deal
Well,
of them seem to think I'm an authority on Veda and that I know hundreds of times more about Veda than most of them
then
do.
that's
So
for
I
them
wonder
to
why they
say.
think that.
That's for them to say, not for you. So if you're recognized, that's for your recognizers to recognize you, not for you to recognize yourself.
That's correct. And I'm telling you that they do recognize me.
Well, I don't see why you need you to tell me that they recognize you. If they recognize you, they should be telling me, or it should just be factual. Like, I don't know what the is the utility of you telling me like how many followers you have. If you have followers, it should be obvious.
Well, I think it is.
I mean, it's like, okay, when the guru arrives at the airport and there's hundreds of people waiting, like, okay, he's got followers. You don't know, like the guru is at the airport and he's got to wait for a taxi and, telling the taxi driver how many followers he has.
Well, can't I make the same argument against you? Only it's actually true.
Well, then just, obviously with science-based show, you should be able to quantify any of your claims.
Yeah, that's correct. So the question is, how do we validate a source? And then we have to go to pramana, which are the accepted manners of proving something. So we'd have to look through those, and one of those is the testimony of an expert. And then it's a question of, well, how do we qualify someone as an expert? And the answer is that other people who are recognized as experts have to accept that person's testimony as authoritative to whatever degree they're willing to do so.
Yeah, but so this is like declare nonsense of secular chronism. Like she wants to like Ask Noah webpage is like, like I have been declared authoritative by the sages. And you're saying like, no, like you don't get a stamp of, like approval from some internet webpage that says you've been declared authoritative from the sages. And you can't self-declare that you've been declared authoritative by the sages. You actually have to be declared authoritative by the sages. And if that's happened, it will be obvious.
Yeah, I guess when someone's an authority on true knowledge, it will be obvious to those who have eyes to see it.
Yeah, and just in general, like like obviously, it'd be so obvious that it'd be counterproductive for a person to have to call attention to it.
Well, I'm only doing it because I'm only doing it because you're blatantly promoting falsehood. You're trying to say that this book that you have in your hands is somehow Veda, but it's not. It's some random thing written by someone who probably wasn't an expert. Doesn't mean it doesn't have some truths in it, but it's not the truth. So it's important to make those distinctions. These later texts or commentaries, they're not the Veda. When we say the Veda, we mean for specific things.
You're saying your sect, but I'm saying what ISKCON says, no, they mean that this is more authoritative than what you're calling the Vedas, that there's authoritative, and because Krishna is the most authoritative of all of the deities, and so the words of Krishna through Vyasudev are the most authoritative of all the scripture. That's why I say that according to ISKCON, no, this is the Veda. Bhagavatam, this is the most authoritative you could get of any scripture. And it was okay. You're part of a sect that disagrees with that. Fine. So you're like, okay, so you're just like, that's obvious. So you made your point, or you're saying like, no, every single time, like, you got to go into the same debate and repeat yourself. Where it's like, okay, we know your opinion on this issue.
Well, yeah, when there's a blatant falsehood, I am going to have to correct it because people aren't going to know the difference. They're going to pick up Prabhupada's shit book and think, well, this is all that India has to offer, when clearly that's not the case.
Well, I mean, this isn't even about Prabhupada, but I mean, it's just sectarian. You're saying the Bhagavatam is by Vyasudev, and it's saying the exalting the status of the Bhagavatam goes back to Lord Chaitanya 500 years ago.
Sure, but if it's not an intact oral tradition, it's outside of traditional dharma, right? So it has no standing.
Well, no, I think everyone agrees.
Well, I'm afraid that is what it says. The Veda was revealed. It has to be passed down orally. Otherwise, it's just something someone wrote down that may or may not mean anything.
This was revealed from Krishna himself.
Again, I don't think you're understanding what oral tradition actually means. So it would have to be like, okay, well, my guru was this guy and his guru was this guy all the way back to whatever source you wanted to call your authoritative text, that would be acceptable within that school as authoritative if other
opens
people
up the
accepted your
Bhagavad Gita.
testimony.
It's saying Vyasadeva was a student of Krishna. He was there at the feet of Krishna. He's giving the words of wisdom that he heard from Krishna himself.
Yeah, and it's written down, which makes it nothing. Because it's an oral tradition.
So, I mean, the memories of Krishna, the stories of Krishna, even the other blog post that Vince in his story, like I was going to disagree with, but somehow about prostitution and Krishna, that story is from the Srimad Bhagavatam, because the 10th canto records the biography of Krishna that is considered authoritative, the Bhagavatam account of the life of Krishna.
Authoritative according to who?
According to the followers of Krishna, and even to the followers of people who aren't followers of Krishna, but the recognizers of Krishna recognize the Bhagavatam as authoritative text on Krishna.
It looks like Vincent is back.
And for people who put Krishna at the top of the pantheon, that makes it Veda.
We can talk about this if you want. We can talk about that. Yeah, the blog post. So, what did you think? I mean, basically, what did you think of that canto where Krishna comes upon a hunchback woman who is a seller of oils, erotic oils, erotic incenses and stuff like that. She's a hunchback, but she I think she gives. I think she is very generous with her oil with Krishna and his men, and so Krishna cures her of her hunchback and makes her, a beautiful woman, and she becomes lusty for Krishna and for the men, and she can't help but show it, and she's, everyone can tell that she's lusty for them, and he says that him and his men will visit her home later, where traveling men can relieve their anxieties, and homeless men, and I mean, didn't directly say she was going to be, well, I mean, obviously she was going to be having sex with all these men, and she was an erotic.
God forbid. Like, no, I don't buy that. Like, I read your post and like, no, I don't buy that.
You don't buy? Oh, come on, how do you not buy that from that? That said that she became lusty for them, and then he said, don't worry, come home, and then we'll be able to relieve our anxieties in you.
Well, I mean, okay, possibly, because it's sinful behavior, it's not condoned behavior, and saying like, obviously prostitution's a reality, and maybe like the warriors or something, a caste of a certain people that would be more likely to do that behavior. But no, I don't even think that, like, I would be likely to complete reject, and saying this woman was a demoness. I mean, they're like, she was like a reincarnation from one of Ravana and the Ramayana's women.
Bless her.
But I mean, she was one of Kamsa's this woman was one of Kamsa's like associates. She wasn't a righteous woman. So whatever reason, according to the story, Krishna made her. She was ugly on the inside also. I think it's part of the story. Like, she was ugly on the outside.
No, that doesn't say that in the story.
And the inside, she was one of Kamsa's. I mean, do you know anything about this story, Jennifer?
I'm gonna look this way. I'm gonna look her up. Kamsa. Who's Kamsa?
Kamsa's the centerpiece of the story, where Kamsa is Krishna's father. That God forbid, tries to kill him, and eventually Krishna kills him.
Oh no, I don't think she was an associate of Kamsa. She was just. I mean, it's just a short little tale that they're going down the road, and they happen upon a hunchback woman who is selling erotic oils. And she blesses, I think she gives them oil or something like that. She's very devotional to Krishna, and he cures her of her hunchback. And then she becomes all lusty for them, and she's showing it, and everyone can tell. And he says, don't worry, we'll come to your house later, and we can relieve our anxieties. You're good for homeless men like us. I mean, what else are we supposed to... what I was trying to say, obviously, I wrote in that blog post, I showed in other areas where prostitution is condemned in Hinduism, but nothing in Hinduism is absolute. And the other issue was Dattatreya. The sage Dattatreya said he learned from prostitutes. There is some leniency. Krishna blessed this woman's prostitution, and Dattatreya learned from prostitution, which, you know, constituted as like, you know, Vedic learning. So it's not 1000%. It's, you know, there's wiggle room. There is. And it's not like Judaism where it's absolutely in the Torah, you know, it's banned. The Vedas don't, the Samhita Vedas don't mention prostitution. There's
You want me
nothing
to give the backdrop on the Trivanka story? But, I mean, because you know, you're reading, it's out of the 48th chapter of the 10th canto of Bhagavatam. So in the 46th chapter, Krishna finally kills Kamsa. So this Trivanka, also known as Kubja, was a servant of Kamsa, and her job for Kamsa was preparing incense and sandalwood paste. So in the 46th canto, finally Krishna and Kamsa meet after a few years of, you know, sending demons and trying to have Krishna killed. That eventually Krishna and Kamsa finally meet in the wrestling arena in the 46th chapter. And before he does, Trivanka, whose job was to give oils to Kamsa, also gives oil to Balaram and Krishna. Then Krishna, you know, easily kills Kamsa, and then Kamsa, after, you know, Krishna's defeated the evil king, and he's you know, going home, and he passes through Mathura, and he sees this hunchback who had given him the oil, and therefore he turned her into a beautiful woman because because she had anointed him with oil before his battle with Kamsa. But generally, she was a wicked woman. She was the servant of the, you know, the evil Kamsa. So, I mean, that's my understanding of the story. If you're, you
Yeah,
know,
but
you're
that
in a line about you know, prostitution, where Krishna's like, my guys are going to see you later, but the story about him turning her from a hunchback into a beautiful woman is doesn't, you know, I don't see anything to do with prostitution. It's because she gave him oil before his fight with Kamsa.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't change the fact that, you know, she might have started out as Kamsa's servant. It doesn't change the fact that she showed some devotion to Krishna, and that Krishna was well aware of the fact that she lusted for his men, and he gave his blessing over the men going to her home later that evening and relieving their anxieties with her. That doesn't change that fact. Doesn't
Yeah, I mean,
change the
okay,
fact.
she was lusting over his men because she had an evil
No,
disposition.
no, you're no, no,
Krishna turned her
no.
into a beautiful woman,
You're
not
reading that
because,
into it.
of anything about prostitution, but in
I didn't
reward.
say that. I didn't say that. I didn't say it was because of prostitution. I said that he just seemingly he condoned these men that he knew she wanted sexually, the group of men. He condoned them later going to her house and sleeping with her. That's the only point. I'm not saying it's because of prostitution. He condoned that. He did condone it. And like, I think that I mean, this ISKCON thing is coming out. This is why I don't
I mean,
like
do you want me to
ISKCON.
get Prabhupada's commentary on that verse?
I do.
Okay, so I'm going to look up Prabhupada on Trivanka, and it's in the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, chapter 48.
Well, he's going to read all it. So, I mean, he's going to read something negative into that too. I mean, look, there's Devi Dasi in Hinduism, which is sacred prostitution for gods, which, I mean, that would be condoned. So, oh, wait, is that not condoned in Bhagavatam Purana? Is there Devi Dasi in that? I don't know.
Well, I mean, there's some interpretation. So whatever, what verse in chapter 48 is the one that you're interpreting about that mentions his men seeing her later?
Let me go to the website. Let me just look.
So I mean, there's just, okay, let's understand what's happening here, and then, you know, we're gonna try to analyze your your
Let me get it.
your interpretation of
Okay, it was Canto 10. Okay, well, okay, so it's Canto 10, the 42nd chapter.
48th
And
chapter or 42nd.
okay, so it's 42. It says 42. Okay, so right, she's okay. She's the bestower of ecstasy of love. So she's like, she's selling ecstasy oils. Let me see, blah blah, ointment, blah blah blah. The
Okay, I'm
exact.
putting it in the link here. So anybody, I just put
Okay,
the.
she goes. Uh. Okay, here it is. So she goes. Travanka said, "Come, O hero, let us go to my house. I cannot bear to leave you here. Oh, best of love." But wait, there's where she says that she started. Okay. Now endowed with beauty, character, and generosity, Trivka began to feel lusty desires for Lord Kesava. Taking hold of the end of his upper cloth, she smiled and addressed him as follows. Trivaka said, "Oh, come, O hero, let us go to my house. I cannot bear to leave you here. O best of males, praise me, pity on me. Please take pity on me, since you have agitated my mind." Thus entreated by the woman, Lord Krishna first glanced at the face of Balarama, and who was watching the incident, and then at the face of the cowherd boys. Then with a laugh, Krishna replied to her as follows. Krishna said, "O lady with beautiful eyebrows, as soon as I fulfill my purpose, I will certainly visit your house where men can relieve their anxiety. Indeed, you are the best refuge for us homeless travelers." So that's chapters 9.
Yeah, I mean that just okay if they're mendicants that they're going to beg at her house and she's going to give them like grain offerings or rice or prasad. I mean, they're simple, saying that.
What are you talking about, Prasad? They're going there because she's lusting for him, and she said, "Don't leave me. Come to my house. You've agitated my mind." I mean,
Yeah, I mean, it's saying that where
how
men can relieve
rice
their
offering?
anxiety. So let me
Oh,
look at
come on,
let me
Dave.
look at text 12. Um,
So wait, you're saying we're not supposed to read anything from the fact that she says she's lusty for him, come to my house. Then Krishna looks at all the men and smiles, and then says, "Oh, beautiful woman, don't worry, we're gonna come to your house tonight where we can relieve our anxieties." We're supposed to believe that they're going outside to get alms and rice when I mean, Doovid, I think you're very biased, and I think you don't want to think that there was ever an exception to the rule anywhere. And I think that you're just very biased against this, and now you're just becoming ridiculous. Where you're saying that, I mean, we're not supposed to read a thing into that. How does this turn into begging outside the house for rice?
well, he's going to send his men to her house for prasad.
Relieve that? No, come on, Doovid. Yeah. She wanted them.
Don't you guys think it's just a bit offensive to be offering commentary when you're not validated experts?
No, well, come on.
I think it's a bit offensive, frankly. I mean, do either of you guys actually have like a guru that has a validated lineage? I'm gonna guess no. So why are you offering commentary? We can't even validate the source as authoritative. Now you're offering commentary on an unvalidated source. So just wondering, like, why are we even having this conversation?
Well, obviously to Doovid it's validated. I mean, he thinks this is the most authoritative text of Hinduism.
Right, and his opinion isn't an authoritative one, so it's irrelevant.
Why don't I say my opinion? It's an Iskan's opinion.
Right, and it's not validated either, therefore also irrelevant.
Well, I mean, but there's just, I mean, I just made from the Bhagavatam Purana, in my opinion, it's pretty clear that Krishna gave his approval to this woman having sex with several men. And obviously, and Dattatreya also, we know outright he learned from prostitutes, so he was hanging out with prostitutes. So I mean, obviously there's loopholes. I mean, just like when you read the Kama Sutra, it says that in some places homosexuality was accepted, in some places it wasn't. It's the way it works. And I mean, when you read the Mahabharata, there are women who are servants of, they're Kama servants in they had brothel, the kings had brothels, harems, and things like that. I mean, it's yeah, usually you're not supposed to practice prostitution, yeah, but I mean, there
Well,
is.
didn't Krishna free some girls from prostitution and they danced with them and he married them or something?
Yeah, I mean it's possible, and even if Krishna did it, it doesn't mean that for your devotee of Krishna that conservative behavior wasn't the norm. And I'd have to ask an expert, saying on that verse, and like I was, I'm glad that you're writing about the Bhagavatam, and even if we disagree about the interpretation of that verse, um, that's fine. And like I'm not a member, say initiated part of the Sampradaya of ISKCON. Maybe someone who knows more about that verse. It doesn't appear that Prabhupada commented on that verse. I could take the book off the shelf, but I looked online and it appeared that Prabhupada didn't have any comment on that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I know that in the very end, I know it, you have to, it doesn't say that, oh, we're going to go to your house and have sex with you. But I mean, the way it's all written out like that, I don't think that he's talking about going there.
I mean, it
to
meant
get
that
on.
Krishna was unmarried at the time, that at this period of time, Krishna would have been unmarried.
Okay, but so he was unmarried and him and his men.
I did see that in a commentary that someone did make a comment on that was taking an approach probably more not ISKCON but just a web page that had a comment on that verse mentioned that Krishna was not married at the time. But I mean, either way, obviously prostitution's mentioned multiple times in what I would call Vedic literature, even if Jennifer doesn't include in the larger Vedic literature, and probably even in what Jennifer would include the Vedas, also includes prostitution. Saying it's bad karma, but obviously people do things that go against dharma and cause bad karma, and the Vedas include stories of people who have bad karma and act poorly, and those are one of the moralistic lessons that we learn from these stories is these karmatic lessons. And Trivanka's like I've heard about her stories before. I mean, she's a major character that because when Krishna, that's kind of the pinnacle of Krishna when he finally meets Kamsa in the wrestling arena, and Trivanka's right there to give him oil.
Well, there's one thing. It says that after he changes her, removes her, she's no longer a hunchback. He turns her into a beautiful woman. It says that she has character and generosity. So, it says that now endowed with beauty, character, and generosity, Tripha began to feel lusty desires for Lord Kesava. So it's after, now she has character, generosity. He didn't just turn her into a beautiful woman while she had an ugly soul.
Well, I mean, maybe he sanctioned, so to say, kosher marriage between her and Lord Kesava.
I mean,
you're reading like prostitution, like God forbid, like some sort of gangbang.
Well,
but
yeah, that's what I'm reading. Yeah,
like,
that is what I'm
like,
reading.
I could see you're reading, but like you're like get your mind out of the gutter. Like I'm not
It's
sure.
not the gutter.
I'm not sure that you're reading like,
not
insist
the
on
gutter.
gangbang here.
The Jews turned sex into the gutter.
You're the
used
one
to
reading
be
a
divinized-
gangbang into this
used to be
into
divinized.
this
No,
story.
there's
Like I've
divinity.
never heard anyone read a gangbang into this, but like you're insisting on like reading a gangbang into this story.
I think that it does. I think it's trying to allude to it, definitely. Anyway, then I want to be one of Dattatreya's boys, okay? Like, I want Dattatreya to come and learn from me, like he did the other prostitutes. So if you have an issue with that,
that's pushing it a little bit far. I mean, Sri Dattatreya was like one of the greatest sages of all time.
Well,
I highly doubt he would have endorsed prostitution, so I'm going to have to see an actual source on that.
I'm the prostitute he learned from. So sue me. What are you going to do?
You're
well,
claiming
it's just
that you're
funny that if you claim to understand karma and you speak such filth, you don't think there's going to be any consequences karmatically for that. It is filth to declare yourself Dattatreya's guru. It is extremely offensive to make claims like that.
I didn't claim to call myself Dattatreya's guru. I said that I'm the prostitute he learned from. I mean, I'm obviously not the prostitute he learned from.
Reincarnation?
A reincarnation of the prostitute he learned from.
Well, I'm gonna have to see
And I'm
sources
also
on this because I have no idea what you guys are talking about. I mean, I
I
think
got
Veda, I
banged
think
by
science,
Krishna and all his friends.
I think science, I think statecraft, I think civilization. I don't think whether someone endorsed prostitution or not. I think we all know prostitution is not a profession we'd want our daughters to be partaking in. So must be
But it's mentioned in
suboptimal.
the Vedas
That's because
as
you
like
think
a
of sex in
punishment
such a
for
dirty,
bad.
low way. You can't see the God in sex because you're low. You read filth into sex because you're filth. There's nothing wrong with
Well,
sex.
Vincent, I really think it's just absurd that you don't recognize me as at least some type of authority. It just sort of goes to show how, one track your mind is. Like, you're not actually listening to what it is that I'm saying. Like, nowhere in the tradition is anyone going to endorse prostitution.
No, I know, but I'm saying I'm saying there's a possible gangbang that happened with Krishna's approval and Dattatreya learned from prostitutes. That's what I'm saying. I said in the title of the article was, did Krishna and Dattatreya approve of prostitution? Maybe Krishna approved of a gangbang and maybe Dattatreya hung out with prostitutes. That's what I'm saying.
Well,
And
did Krishna or did Krishna not liberate women from being prostitutes?
well, there's prostitute and slavery, and then there's divine prostitution where you are a prostitute of your own will for God. I mean, there's a difference between those two things.
Hookers for God?
Yeah,
is that right?
Yes, that happened in the ancient world. I mean, that's what was happening in ancient
There were
Babylon.
prostitutes. I mean, even within Hinduism, they're not necessarily like becoming like the people we learn righteous behavior from, but there are people who had weird or even bad karma.
What about Doooovid? No, what about Doooovid?
And Babylon, obviously, like Ishtar and Isis, where
Yes.
where you did have famous temple prostitutes.
Yes.
But like in Hinduism, I don't know if you have any righteous prostitutes.
Yeah, you have Doooovid. Yes, you do. What about?
I mean, they repent. Usually, the prostitutes are mentioned repent, or maybe they were prostitutes.
Yeah, in Hinduism, we have Doooovid.
They weren't righteous because they were a prostitute. Like even though they were a prostitute, they were able to accomplish some righteous.
You just don't call Devi Dasis prostitutes. There are girls who are pimped out of temples. You don't call them prostitutes, but they are. They're sacred prostitutes. In India, that does happen. Devi Dasi is. I mean, people are all around the world are trying to stop it to say, oh, they're using underage girls for a ritualistic temple sex. That's what I'm talking about. I mean, I don't think the girls should be enforced to do this, but I think that, we know that in Hinduism, ritualistic temple sex happens. So sacred prostitution does happen. It happened in Babylon, and I just so happen to be a sacred prostitute. Not that I'm selling my body, but that's like my whole body and soul. So don't tell me that there's no sacred prostitution going on in Hinduism or that it hasn't been happening all around the world for centuries. You, the Jews, just decided that there was filth in it, and you read something filthy and ugly into something divine, and now you're just anyone who is not like you're just trying to bring them down. You can't see the divinity in it, good, but don't bring other people down with you.
Okay, well, when I say prostitution, I'm talking about taking money for sex. Now
that's what happens in Devi Dasi. The temple gets money.
Ritualistic sex in the temple is maybe not
prostitution. Usually,
you get money for it.
And Babylon, it can hardly be said to be a Vedic civilization, right?
No,
it was pretty degenerate.
Okay, but it's happening in India. It's happening in Hinduism. Okay, wait. What about the sultans who had harems? Is that
what
degenerate?
about them? What about them? I suppose it depends on the circumstances. Where they, it really depends on the circumstances.
What do you mean? Why does it depend on the circumstances?
Because it depends if it's a conformity with Dharma, which is a principle of minimizing the harm. And so prostitution as a phenomenon wouldn't be on the main thing of contemplation. It's such a minor thing. I just don't understand why it's such a heavy topic of focus. Like, what's the relevance of this? It just seems like you're trying to justify some sexual angle that's simply not there.
Well, I mean, he's trying to take, if you take like Vince, if like I assume you're not shy to take full credit for what you're trying to do. You're even trying to, not just say that, there are occasions where prostitution is mentioned as a function of society, that there's even, times or maybe even as the whole genre could be considered a righteous profession and a special act of divine service.
Yeah, that was the way it was
I
assumed
mean,
to
like
be.
from an old school, like tantric, Kama Sutra,
Yeah,
Kama Devi,
Tantra. I
whatever
mean,
perspective, you're saying no, it's not sinful behavior. And saying it's okay if you're trying to co-opt Krishna. You're saying no. I mean, Krishna, the devotees of Krishna have proper say Vaishnava etiquette, and that includes sexual purity, Vaishnava etiquette. In order to be a proper Vaishnava, you have to have sexual purity. It's a requirement. But yet here you're saying that like no, you could be a Vaishnava and not have a proper
he wasn't a
sexual
Vaishnava.
refinement. And it's saying like no, unlikely. My understanding, there's such a thing as Vaishnava etiquette, and that requires sexual purity. So like
I'm not
no, I mean,
saying that that's Vaishnava etiquette, but I'm saying that at least seemingly a Krishna in this one area seemed to approve of this woman's desires. He didn't say, "Oh, woman, you should not lust after him. He's not your husband." He didn't like chastise her. She's like, "I'm lusty for you. Come to my house." And then Krishna smiles to everyone and says, "Oh, don't worry, woman. We're going to come over and relieve our anxieties there." I
yeah. So I
mean,
saw some commentators say that because she was, I guess, demonic in spirit, and she was like a reincarnation of a demon, and she was Kamsa's servant who, although she did something positive to be rewarded by Krishna, her demonic spirit possibly pervaded. So Krishna, God forbid, according to that interpretation, would have assigned her the role of a prostitute because she's in essence a demon. And even though she had been given a beautiful
a demon who's
exterior
not.
body, the essential demonic nature say, okay, like she could be a prostitute because that's the essential nature of her soul.
Well, I know talking about turning a demoness. Look, Kamadeva, my god, Kamadeva, Hidimba. She was a demoness. She was a cannibal demoness, and she didn't even come to Dharma through her own will. The god Kamadeva shot a lust arrow into her, and she lusted after the princes who her cannibal clan was coming to kill and eat, and she rescued them. So, I mean, then what happened was it turned out she became devoted to them and she followed them and she eventually had a child with one of the princes and she became enlightened and she was a demoness, but she kind of found her way to God. And even in that, it was against her own will because the god Kamadeva pierced her with an arrow. So it wasn't even like out of her own will. She, came to the right side. And so she became elevated in status and, was no longer like this wicked demoness. So, I mean,
Well,
this
can we
woman,
move back and let's look at it on a karmatic, more spiritual meta-analysis level, where it's like in terms of group strategy, like I was talking at the beginning of the show when I was chanting mantra, devotional singing, chanting together creates a lot of unity. Part of like a group strategy, group identity. But at some level, like from a Kabbalistic term, we call it like the Sitra Akar, the other force. Um, Forbidden sexual relations creates extremely strong group cohesion and group identity. And something like like God forbid a temple prostitute, where you would have basically all members of the cult became initiated into the cult by having forbidden sexual relations, either homosexual or heterosexual, with the temple prostitute. And like we believe that the original Canaanite religions, or certain Babylonian or possibly other religions, had these sort of rituals, and that was part of the initiation. And certainly from a like a meta-analysis level, that even if it's unbecoming sinful behavior, it still has an effect of creating an extremely strong group cohesiveness. And if you look
it's
like,
not
okay, a
sinful.
tribal group that was engaged in sinful activity in general, in say, oh, but and they had it part of their initiation ceremony, also this forbidden sexual activity, so it adds up. But you're saying like, no, there are people, there's like this cult out there, and they're like righteous and they're do-gooders, but they also at the same time have like these, you know, perverted initiation ceremonies, temple prostitutes and stuff like that. I think, you know, by nature, like, no, temple prostitutes are part of a demonic, and you say like Kama, you know, Kama Devi, worshipable, but like, no, I mean, she's not one of the 20 avatars, or maybe you say like a reincarnation, and you know, it's not becoming, like, you know, so like, no, you know, don't worship Kama Devi. You know, like, you could worship the demigods, but when you're worshiping the demigods, you know, you have to know that they're just demigods.
Well, okay, I don't agree with that Krishna centrality, but I don't agree with that, obviously, and from a different. But what I want to say that you're talking about these sacred prostitutes being sinful. It's because you are reading lowness into it, because you can only think about sex in a low way. You can't think about sex as a way to elevate your consciousness and become.
Of course you can, within the sanctity of marriage. It's like saying that's why you have a sanctified sexual relations, unsanctioned sexual relations. Unsanctioned sexual relations cause an extreme binding of karma, but in a sinful way. If you do it in the confines of, you know, marriage or procreation, like, yes, what you're saying is true, but temple prostitution is not a sanctioned form.
Not sanctioned by who?
Not sanctioned temple prostitution. It mentions that the phenomenon existed. Like, yes, the phenomenon existed, but it wasn't sanctioned.
You're acting like, oh, the Jewish opinion on this is definitive and nobody else, like, you know, that's it. Judaism says it's a sin, and Judaism said that was the wrong religion, so that's it. No, obviously I'm coming from the other side of the equation. I'm saying
like a Frankist. I mean, you're like a Jewish Frankist who's like, you know, Frank was the, you know, God forbid, the Jew who claimed to be in reincarnation of Shabbatai Tzvi, who conducted orgies of what we believe testimony of as many as 5,000 people participated in Yaakov Frank's orgies.
He was working on, oh, this is dirty. He was talking like, you know, that it was still.
No, he's saying what you said. I mean, yeah, Jacob Frank said what you said, and he tried to sanctify forbidden sexual acts. And according to many testimonies, he conducted orgies with as many of 5,000 people in Europe.
He was quote unquote asking Jews to sin. I'm not asking people to sin. I'm not trying to make it like, ooh, it's forbidden. Do whatever you want. I'm trying to say that this is a divine institution.
He said that the forbidden became permitted and was actually, you know, trying to convince
people. It was through a Jewish lens. It didn't have the positivity of the ancient pagan religions. It came through a Jewish lens. It was distorted.
Well, yeah, because that was you're talking about like the ancient temple cults and what's put together from anthropologists, and you might have modern, like your average. You could look on a meta-analysis level, like your average bar and club and lounge, you know, all have temple prostitutes, because, like, you know, God forbid, there's probably some unfortunate woman who slept with a large portion of the you know, men who go to a lot of establishments, and you say, well, there's not like official form of temple prostitution, but the karmatic phenomenon obviously exists all over the world.
You think so low about sex that, I mean, that's your problem.
Okay, well, Vincent, why don't you tell us the difference between a standard run-of-the-mill prostitute and a divine prostitute? Maybe clear it up a little bit.
A divine prostitute is somebody who would naturally be like dedicated to a temple and is doing it for the purpose of like God and to actually help civilization. I mean, that these
as a part of an initiation ceremony, they're saying that like a person
it could be. It's sometimes
by having sex with the temple prostitute, and the temple prostitute serves her function of initiating people into the cult.
Sometimes,
or that's something else, that it's actually just like a ritual, like where they perform a sex act, not as an initiation ritual, but as an actual form of worship, that they actually did it in front of the deity, as we believe the Canaanites, that's how they worship the deity, that the priest, and sometimes it was homosexual, sometimes it was heterosexual, but they actually had sex right in front of the deity, and that was, you know, so to say, you know, God forbid, you know, from a pejorative, just like, you know, some people thought deities required animal and even human sacrifices, that some people thought that the deity required having sex in front of it.
Yeah, well, don't bring up like animal and human sacrifices in the same like genre of, sex before an idol. But
Oh.
what you said, yes, and that's
You have those two phenomena. You have your initiation temple prostitutes.
You're having sex with a lot of people, but it's for a very high reason. It's not like, oh, I'm just, you're thinking about it in a very low way. The way they're
I'm not
thinking
making a judgment. I'm saying that there's sanctioned and unsanctioned, according to scripture and morality system. There's sanctioned sexual acts and unsanctioned sexual acts, and if it's unsanctioned, it's in the nature of sinful behavior. And just a differentiation on the phenomenon of temple prostitution. You could have the promiscuity service where you say, okay, there's a female priest, and if she's initiating people into the cult through sexual activity, or if she's performing the worship service through sexual activity, in theory, you could have, so to say, a temple priestess who only had sexual relations with even her husband, but it was part of the temple ritual. Or you say, okay, it was prostitute in nature because the temple priestess, by the end of, decades of serving the temple priestess, had sexual relations with tens or hundreds of different priests.
I'm sorry, what exactly are you asking me?
Well, I'm differentiating that you could have, so to say, temple prostitution without promiscuity. You could have, there's different forms of temple prostitution, and
but some of it was promiscuous. There was definitely.
I don't know if what God forbid, like what type of temple prostitute are you claiming to be?
Oh, I would be. I would if I.
You're an initiator, or you're a performer for the deities, and saying, then who do you perform?
Both.
You're saying that when people join the cult, that they become initiated into the cult by having sex with you, God forbid.
And not. It doesn't need to 100% go that way, but
it's like you want to be a member, and
I don't put it like that to people.
They become members by having sex with you. God forbid.
I don't put it. I don't know. I'm not like, oh, you want to become a member of my cult? Have sex with me.
Your cult. You're saying the temple cult. That the way
you're doing it in the
service cult, it's the temple's cult, but the method of getting initiated into the temple cult is through this sexual activity.
Well, just look at all the knowledge I've given the world. How come you're not sucking my dick, Vincent?
Well, because that's not everyone has to be sucking someone's dick. It's just a different arrangement. That doesn't involve. I'm not trying to.
If you recognize Veda as authoritative and you've seen my work, shouldn't you be down on your knees praising me?
Well, I wouldn't want to do that as a form of worship.
Well, then you're not a very good temple prostitute, let me say. Gandalf's better at licking my balls than you are, bud. Speaking of which, welcome to the show, Gandalf.
Well, before
Thank
we
you
move
so much
on,
for joining us.
Yes. My books. I brought like all these books off the shelf, and we got derailed because I called the Bhagavatam Veda. But if I just show my books, and if you want to comment, you can, or I could just take like 2 minutes to show these books because it's related to a lot of these ideas we're pushing. So this is a special commentary on the 5th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam that gives detailed descriptions about Vedic cosmology, how the world was created, the nature of the lokas and the heavens, and the heavenly and hellish planets. So, from a cosmological physics aspect, and the ISKCON Temple of the Vedic Planetarium, which will be the largest temple in all of India, the second largest in the world, is supposed to have some sort of representation of the Vedic cosmology described in the 5th canto of Bhagavatam. Here's another thing that, I'm not sure its level of scripture. It's called the Bhugola Tattva, and it's a translation of some sort of scriptural explanation of how the Vedic cosmos work. So I'm not going to go through all of these, although, because we got these other guests on that don't seem that interested in this topic. This was Prabhupada's physicist, and I think he went to Cornell, PhD of physics from Cornell, and then he joined ISKCON, and you read through all of Bhagavatam and Prabhupada's literature, and he was assigned to trying to correspond modern physics with the explanation of the cosmos laid out in the 5th canto of Bhagavatam. He wrote a whole bunch of books. Here's God and Science, Divine Causation, the Laws of Nature, interesting Vedic cosmography and astronomy. This one's like the measurement of the universe, how big is the universe, and looking at different parts of the Bhagavatam or even various parts of the Vedas that give description of the universe. Here's another one, mechanistic and non-mechanistic science, an investigation into the nature of consciousness and form, where he was looking at consciousness trying to correspond to neuroscience and Vedic explanations of consciousness. Here's another book, Maya, The World is Virtual Reality. One of these books that calls into question like the gunas and trying to correspond physics possibly upon what I'm going to hit with the multiple truth hypothesis. This one might be the most famous, Mysteries of the Sacred Universe, the Cosmology of the Bhagavan Purana. And there's like a CD that goes along where they programmed computer graphics simulation software to show what it would look like. These books I found online. This guy said he was Ashish Delela. So, Richard Thompson was a PhD Cornell physicist. Ashish Delela is a computer programmer who, loves physics and the Vedas. And he read through Prabhupada's literature and said that it encouraged him to believe in the cosmology that the Vedas listed as true and that it could be true according to physics. And he wrote a few books. Here's Emotion, Cognition, Relation, a soul-based theory of its origins and mechanisms, kind of like a approach to corresponding neuroscience in Vedic explanations of consciousness. Here's one, Shakya Science, trying to look at the Vedic applications of science. Here's Quantum Meaning, a semantic interpretation of quantum theory with the purpose of trying to show that quantum theory supports the Vedas. Jennifer will probably enjoy just the title of this one, Gödel's Mistake, the Role in Meaning in Mathematics, where he says things very similar to what Jennifer says, and go about how the Vedic understanding of logic is versus what Gödel's interpretation is meant for the direction of mathematics in the West. So I wanted to at least cover those to show, like some of the Hindu background to Doooovid's multiple truth hypothesis and this idea of Vedic cosmology, without getting too derailed into like Krishna and what's authoritative scripture or not. Certainly there's an understanding of how the world came into being and like how the world exists that is laid out in various forms of Vedic literature. And there's a lot of literature, like in modern days, a lot of people like Ashish Delela and Richard Thompson, there's a lot of Jews doing it too with Kabbalah, but I think in Hinduism, there's the Vedic scriptures are much more aligned. And, so it's an interesting subject that I hope to cover more and more. I thought Vince might have interest in that subject, or are you saying like, we don't, God forbid, like have to talk about sex at all, like we're more bent on like physics and cosmology. So I'm not sure how much of your Hinduism, Vince, is in that area, and or we could just move on to Gandalf and table this to the future we can review.
In cosmology, what is my Hindu cosmology? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, we've been talking about Hinduism, but we haven't, Hinduism, probably of all the religions and all the scripture, corresponds the best with quantum theory and physics and a lot of the modern understandings of consciousness. But like Hinduism's a big field, and so there's many Hindus that don't know the literature or vast understandings that the acharyas or the scripture put forward on things like consciousness and quantum reality.
Yeah, I'm not on that level. I can't help on that level.
But you are vaguely familiar with it as part of like your
I
religion.
know that people say that. I know that I haven't delved that deeply into that part of Hinduism where it's very
Technical,
no, not that it's technical
or there's
where
like theology, where there's like, and there's 8 parts of the soul, and the material world is comes from these 5 elements. And
like things that are a little bit less like, that seem like it just seems like, like anyone could make it up, or not that it not that what they're saying isn't true, or that, I mean, it might be true, but I think it is very hard to prove those kinds of things. Like I'm not
What do you know about Hinduism exactly, other than prostitutes are a thing?
on. I know a lot more. You know that I know a lot more about Hinduism than prostitutes.
Well, why don't you tell us?
Well, I mean, I know Hinduism through number one, reading it, number two, living it. So, I mean, yeah, I've read the four Samhita Vedas, I've read the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, the Puranas, parts of Vedanta, and then I've been to India. Most of my friends are Hindu. Going to temple.
That is not actually any knowledge.
I think that is knowledge.
Well, Veda was revealed and then it was passed down. Shruti and Smrti. None of those include I read a book. It was either something was revealed to me or something was passed down to me. So, okay, you read the book. What knowledge did you get out of it?
In
I got
ISKCON, the
knowledge out
lecture
of
today,
that.
the guy kept on, spirituality is about the purification of your heart. Hinduism is a process to purify your heart, among other things.
Yeah, well, I'm getting the heart of Trevista or whatever her name is.
Yeah, this is my understanding of everything that, I've not read as much in Hinduism maybe as you have, but Hinduism is an oral tradition. You have to be accepted by a teacher or a master, and they have to pass down what they received from their teacher or master. It's an unbroken chain that
But
is.
that doesn't say that in the Samhita Veda. That's after
But,
Samhita.
but you're looking at it as if it's a written tradition. It's not a written tradition.
It was unwritten. No, it once was unwritten, but in the Kali Yuga they wrote it down.
Wait. Once was
They wrote it down
unwritten.
The Kali Yuga, they wrote it down in the Kali Yuga. Before the Kali Yuga, it wasn't written. They wrote it for a reason. They didn't read it so people couldn't read it. They wrote it because the oral tradition wasn't wasn't good enough anymore. We had declined so much that we needed more than the oral tradition. We couldn't remember everything orally. So Vedvyasa wrote it all down in the Vedas. That's what, Vedvyasa wrote it down so we could read it.
Yeah, but it's not, but the oral tradition didn't go away completely. I mean, it was
completely, but it was no longer perfected. The reason why it's written is because the oral tradition, we could no longer the average person could no longer understand fully through the oral tradition because they couldn't remember all that much like they used to in the old ages. So now it's written down for us.
And all that's done is cause more and more confusion, proliferation of all these other schools. That happens in every religion where this occurs.
Take it up with Vedvyasa. Vedvyasa wrote all this down and disseminated it and put it all in different categories so that we could learn the best we could. That's the best that we're going to get in the Kali Yuga.
I really don't know how you can make such pronouncements, Vincent, frankly.
How do you make such pronouncements, Jennifer?
Well, have you actually read my blog at all?
Yes, it's very hard to understand.
Right, because you don't actually understand what Hinduism is actually about. You know who I am, Vincent. I have told you who I am. Shouldn't I be the authority on this?
Well, I don't take him to be. What is this? Not Diane under Saraswati. Is that it?
Why not? Because you don't like what he said about prostitutes? Because it's inconvenient to your narrative that sex is somehow going to give you enlightenment? It's such foolish nonsense.
I don't like that. No, come on, Jen. You're just like straw manning me now. No.
Well, what's your problem with Swami?
That he was too influenced by the post-Samhita literature. When he says Veda, he means a lot of Vedanta, and that's filled with a lot of post-Samhita rubbish that
Well,
I
I'm
just...
pretty sure that his message was to go back to the original 4 Vedas.
But he couldn't do that. He was too immersed in the post-Samhita literature, which in my opinion is degraded because the age had fallen. The Samhita Vedas were written, they were the first ones that were written, so that was right after the oral age. So that was like, the closest to the oral age you're going to get. And then after, when Vedanta was written, we were further down, we were further degraded. So I find a lot of things in Vedanta to be unpalatable. And but he didn't. I mean, I think that he took all of Vedanta very seriously. And
well, do you know what Vedanta means? It means the end of knowledge. Right?
I know.
So it's a logical system which is superior to the Western version of logic, because it allows a top-down approach rather than just a bottom-up approach, which is what we're stuck with, which is why things are stalled. So tell me again how Vedanta is not relevant when it solves problems like consciousness, quantum computing.
I didn't say it wasn't relevant. I said, no, well, there's a lot more in Vedanta than just, remedies for quantum computing. I mean, there's a lot in Vedanta.
Do you have a unified field model? Does anybody have one other than me? No. That makes me guess what the authority.
Jen, I mean, I don't think, John,
yeah,
you don't know.
That's how the tradition works. Shruti and Smrti.
According to who?
According to the tradition itself. You said so yourself. Shruti and Smrti are the only acceptable means of transmission of knowledge.
Dattatreya became a guru by hanging out with animals. Okay, wait. Dattatreya became a guru by hanging out with animals and whores. Okay, he didn't need any.
That's a metaphor, okay?
No,
you are not Sri Dattatreya, Vincent. If you were, you would have a different personality.
I didn't say I was Dattatreya. I said he became a guru.
So what's your point?
So my point is that you don't have to necessarily go through a guru like you.
Okay, that is absolutely not what the point of it is. He was already born a great sage. He was born Vedic rishis, okay? It's a completely very unusual situation for somebody to be a master without having a guru themselves. And even he had gurus, even though they weren't human, right? Because he learned how nature works by studying nature.
Yeah.
Which is the point of that story. It's not meant to glorify prostitution.
I know, but then when we get into this, then you start fighting over which oral tradition is acceptable and which one isn't. I mean,
the one that conforms with science is the one that has the authority, because in the West, science is considered authoritative. So we use their standards, because when in Rome, do as the Romans. And so whoever's testimony conforms with science is the one who is considered the authority, I'm afraid.
So why don't we have pure consensus on your theories, Jan?
Well, no one's been able to defeat any of my positions. So you're not going to get a consensus with idiots.
We can, but what about, like, quantum physicists and stuff?
Yeah, no one's been able to push back on my theory. It's simply not possible within the scientific parameters to do that, because my theory makes all the predictions and the current model doesn't. Therefore, my theory is better because it makes more predictions. That is Western science definition. Nothing to do with these.
Why isn't this in all, like, physics periodical journals and stuff like that? Why isn't this, like, written up?
Are you serious?
Why would you compare? The Academy is a pile of dog shit. Why should a pile of dog shit judge what is true and what is not when the Academy tells us there's 10 million genders? Come on.
Wait, you're saying that all of these physicists all around the world, like, none of them can see that Jen's model is, like, the best model? Like, it's just not clicking for anyone except for Jen?
Half these scientists are quacks, Vincent. So, I mean, who cares?
Every last one of them?
There are some of them that agree with me. Some of them agree with me. Like, literally, it's like I'm going to display the picture of the periodic table right now on the screen for everyone to see.
Yeah, I know,
how the hell are you going to argue with that? I got a question. How do you argue with that? It's
this is not
obviously perfect.
really
You
rude.
are invoking, you are making an appeal to an authority that I thought you were red-pilled enough to know was invalid, but I guess I have to question that now.
No, oh, come on. There's not one scientific journal that would have any authority over researching your theory. Not one.
How do you know that my theory hasn't already been published by some Chinese people that ripped it off to win a space filler mathematical contest some years back?
Well, I can't prove that, and neither can you.
Well, it happened. I didn't save the article because I just don't give a shit. But yeah, I guess you don't trust my oral testimony for whatever stupid reason.
Yeah, I don't. What are you, Jen? Are you being crazy?
What the hell are you talking about? You don't like what I'm saying, so now I'm crazy. I won't endorse this ridiculous notion you have about justifying sexual degeneracy through Hinduism, and I take issue with that because the majority of the teachings have absolutely nothing to do with prostitution or sex. So yeah, I mean, obviously,
Okay.
I don't know what's so crazy about what I'm saying exactly. What I'm saying conforms to tradition.
Okay, wait, you're upset about that, and now you're taking it out on me. Why did you just bring it back to that? We were talking about you not having your work reviewed by any credible scientist in the whole wide world anywhere.
Well, again, you're making that statement and you have no idea if it's true or not.
Well, is it true?
Who judges who's a credible scientist or not?
Oh God! So show it to all the scientists in the world. Not one of them is going to be able to.
Are you the judge of who's a credible scientist or not?
Okay. There's no credible scientist on this earth. Is that what you're saying?
No. Are you the judge of a credible scientist or not? Just
a credible scientist.
Wait, Vincent,
you decide who the credible scientist is and take it there.
They would need to come to me. I have had lots of problems with lots of science. Wow. I spent this morning, because I'm talking to people about oil and petroleum geology, right? Because I can understand it.
You're
right.
Crazy.
And there are problems with all these estimates and models they use to determine how much oil is under a given field.
Wait.
Talking with a couple people about the discrepancies in these journals that have been published, and I'm like, who the fuck is the credible authority here? Because I'm noticing logical problems here.
No,
I'm giving you an example. Let me finish. So when I look at who is a credible scientist, I don't treat any of these scientists, because they're published in any peer-reviewed journals, as credible in and of themselves until I check out their arguments and their sources, and I often find lots of problems. Am I a petroleum geologist? No. Do I understand a hell of a lot more petroleum geology than the average person, even who is someone who is scientifically literate? Yes. So can I go in and determine, okay, what's really going on in the WiR oil field versus the new oil fields they're trying to open up off the offshore of the Gulf of Guinea and Nigeria? Yes.
Okay. I told you to find a scientist that you felt was credible and present the theory to them so they could look it over. But in your response to that is that you're so arrogant, you think that these credible scientists need to come to you. Like, they don't even know who you are. How are they going to even think to come to you? They don't even know about your theory or Jen's theory.
I've shown them the theory. They got all butthurt and cried about it. And, they had their chance. As far as I'm concerned, they've discredited themselves.
Jen, you can't find one credible scientist on this earth to show it to?
I've showed it to many. I don't know where you're getting this crazy idea from. That no scientist knows about my theory, but this idea that it being published somehow gives it legitimacy is a bit blue pill.
No, if it does what you're claiming it does, it would be published. I mean, that's huge news. That's like,
oh my God, you are so fucking blue pill, dude. I have a degree in physics, and I know how corrupted that field is, but what's your background in physics, I wonder?
Everyone is just supposed to take your theory, because you've said it.
Well, they're allowed to disprove it. I would be glad to debate them in the traditional manner, which is one of a rigorous live debate. And that hasn't happened yet. So why don't you find me someone? It's so easy to find someone who can disprove what I'm saying. Have them come on the show.
it's very suspicious that you don't like trust absolutely anyone to like even look over. I don't see what's wrong. Why couldn't the average quantum physicist just look it over?
Well, you'd have to ask them, and like there have been people in physics who have looked at this stuff. They're unable to
Very
disprove it.
suspicious, Jen. This
No
sounds
one
very-
has ever been able to disprove my theory. My theory makes predictions. The burden of proof is on the people denying the theory. There has been no contradiction to the
what's
position
the
I have.
ratio of those who deny versus those who approve? What's the ratio?
I have no idea, which would also be an ad
That's
populum
appealing
fallacy.
to that's appealing to
Okay,
ad
how many
populum.
scientists have approved of it, Jen? How many scientists have said, "Oh yes, this is right"? How many?
I think it's more a question of how many have been able to disprove it, because frankly, they may not be able to understand it, especially if they're still mind controlled by the current dogma of physics, which teaches many false things that paralyzes the mind.
Look, if there's no one in this world that's intelligent enough to understand the theory, then it's really not fair for you to ask people to just believe it's
Well,
true.
That's not what
life's not
she's
fair.
saying.
Life's not fair. They could fucking figure it out if they want to. All the answers were already there. Look at the periodic table. Someone else could have figured out that shape before I did, but they didn't. And we should probably ask ourselves why, rather than trying to assert or establish whether I'm an authority or not, which anyone literally denying that at this point looks so foolish.
You know, Vincent, you know, I have an IQ of almost 150, okay? The first time I read through almost the entire corpus of Jen's blog, I'm like, damn, she's got like at least 80 to 85% of everything right. And usually I only endorse stuff that I read like 40 to 45%, and that's like the most excellent stuff, right? And I'm an extremely well-educated person. You know, I'm not an expert. I'm an expert in a couple of fields, 2 or 3 fields where I spend most of my time, but in most fields, I am more than competent enough to hold a conversation with experts to determine if they're full of shit or not within the first 5 minutes of talking to them. And I give Jen, on first pass, I gave her an 80 to 85% approval rating. And on the rest of the stuff, I figured, okay, if she's right on all of that, I'm just going to accept it on faith and figure it out in time and see
Okay, but
what
why
up the other 10, 15%.
You're credible. Gandalf, what have you done to show us that you're credible? Why are you more credible than scientists that have rejected Jen's theory?
Well, I'm not aware of anyone who can credibly reject my theory because, like I said, it makes predictions.
But why is Gandalf more authoritative than those that have rejected it?
I mean, I've had 7 or 8 months of streaming, and there aren't people in universities that know as much as I do on as many subjects as I do. I mean, it's just, that's obvious. It doesn't make me a better person or worse person. I mean, there's some things I just can't do in life. But in terms of a broad, the command of as many subjects with as much breadth as I do is simply just very, very rare. There aren't many
I've been
people
around, like I've seen things, and like I'm awesome. In case you didn't notice, like I'm exceptional.
Well, I've had 8 months of streaming. I mean, Gandalf can hold a conversation credibly on more topics
Like,
than
Vince,
most
how much
people
do you
alive.
need to see? Like you're in the company of like extreme exceptionality. I mean, like, are you not convinced?
No, I'm not at all. I'm not at all.
Even though my knowledge was revealed to me,
But I don't know that.
I can prove that its validity, Vincent. You are denying the Hindu tradition by denying my authority, frankly.
I mean, it's good to be skeptical. Like, I mean, I have to say, like, you know, like, no, I mean, like,
Extreme skepticism is nothing more than cynical utilitarianism. It's just always shifting the goalposts so you can have plausible deniability for your own obviously false claims. So I've been down this road before.
The default as skepticism
The
makes
default
sense.
position is I am correct. If you read my blog, the default position is I am correct.
Skepticism.
Skepticism, but then to what point? At what point does one say, yeah, Jen is probably right? Because to go, you know, to be so skeptical that you never accept new evidence, that's not too intelligent, is it?
I mean, when someone claims something out of the ordinary, the default position is skepticism. So
What am I claiming that's out of the ordinary exactly?
You're claiming that you're out of the ordinary.
I'm claiming that I have a unified field model. Is that out
And
of the
that's-
ordinary when I can prove it that it's a unified field model?
Is it ordinary to have a unified field model?
It's not ordinary, but
Are there lots of other people?
is it an
Do
unreasonable
people come
claim?
across people, on a
No,
regular
no
day
one has
basis
ever, as far
who
as
have-
I know, there are no unified field models. The closest anyone's come is electric.
Okay, so you admit that you're claiming something quite extraordinary.
And the evidence is all there, so to deny it is not the
To be skeptical
to be
is
skeptical is good
the
in the face of
rational
no evidence.
default
But when you have
position. You're
so much
claiming
evidence,
something
when you
extraordinary.
have so much
Therefore,
evidence,
the default position of skepticism makes sense.
no, it doesn't. Not past a certain point. The theory's been out there for 5 years. No one's been able to disprove it. It makes predictions. It's improved science in numerous ways. The default position is I'm correct because my theory is the one that makes the predictions, period. Just because you don't like it or it's inconvenient, it doesn't change the scientific standards.
Okay, well, at least you believe in yourself.
Uh,
At least
theory-
Gandalf believes. At least Gandalf believes. At least you believe in yourself. And at
Well,
least
Doovid,
Gandalf believes in you.
I know you'd never endorse what I'm saying.
Because I'm skeptical by nature. It's nothing against you. It's just you're like, no, I'm still skeptical. Like, I'm not a projector. I'm not a
What
hater. I'm just
standard of evidence would
skeptical.
I have to meet? The fact is, there is no standard that I could meet that would make you endorse what I'm saying because I've already met every reasonable standard out there.
No, I mean, you haven't published your theories in a format that's compatible with the accepted practice of how theories are put forward. So, like, as of
and
now,
I don't care about the accepted practice because look at the state of knowledge production within the West. I mean, Michael Polanyi's Republic of Science was warning in the 1940s about how things were getting shittier and shittier. And like virtually every prediction about how science would collapse into the gutter has all but come true. So to hold Jen to the standards of such a degraded academy is frankly ridiculous. I mean, I just don't respect the academy because I don't respect what goes on there, the political, financial, and cultural pressures they're under, and the absolute shit they produce. Why that's the standard rather than just the quality of the theories and what they can predict about how nature works is beyond me. I don't understand that way of looking at it. I've read Jen's blog. She's pretty much right on most of these things. I just don't see how people can't see that.
well, you can say, okay, like, yeah, like, yay, like, you like, Gandalf loves Jen. Jen's awesome. You're her cheerleader. Great. And, saying, like, okay, and, like, you want to join the Church of Entropy fan club, like, feel free, go right ahead. But like, that's separate from saying, like, is there a solution, a unified field model, and does this woman possess it? And then if she does possess it, like, how come she didn't go through producing it in a way that is accepted for putting forward the conventional means for putting forward theories, even to be assessed? We're saying, like, oh, it hasn't been assessed because it hasn't been assessed because it hasn't been put forward in a way that theories that assessed are put forward.
The conventional means have discredited themselves.
If it were Church of Entropy, Jen Scharf publishing in Nature or one of those, or Geos, one of these other big journals, I no matter how good her theories were, I hate the Academy so much right now. I'd have less faith that her theories were true if they were published there.
That's so weak-minded. I mean,
It's like, oh, it goes for her theory that she's not part of the symposiums of people who talk about similar topics, and so I'm saying you have to have a means, and that's what I'm trying to push forward to, the advancement of these theories. So we're just arguing. So, like, great, like,
But if
Gandalf,
you want to advance theories, disprove my theory, then I'll move on to something more, important or relevant. But why can nobody disprove my theory? Is it because nobody understands it, or because they do understand and they realize that it's the truth?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably because no one understands it because you haven't put it forth in a way that an audience could be expected to actually understand what you're talking about.
Well, I have put it forward in that manner on my blog. It's just that people haven't bothered to ask me any questions about it or read it over, or they just think it should be spoon-fed to them like they're a child.
Yeah,
But
I mean, you
the
haven't
fact is,
structured it in a way
it's
as
not
a
that
complete
hard
theory,
to
like,
understand.
I mean,
Well,
like,
people could
even
talk to me
JF, who
anytime.
wrote the-
People could humble themselves and talk to me anytime, but they choose to go on with their arrogant idealism.
Okay, well, what whether people reach out to you or not, like I don't know, like I mean, like you don't tell me, like who's reaching out to you or not. So like, okay, if people want to learn more, I encourage them to reach out to you. Um, but in terms like, okay, like you just have a blog. You don't have like JF's like revolutionary phenotype where you structured a book that explains your theory. Your blog isn't like a systematic explanation of your theory. It's a collection of blog posts. It's like, no, you don't have a
Actually, it
systematic
is.
explanation of your.
Actually, it is. There's a couple different ways you can read her stuff. You can read it chronologically, or you can read it in order of decreasing or increasing entropy. So you can learn it in at least two or three different ways. Her blog is very well structured. It can read like a book either that's chronological or I guess
Well, it's topical that
physics
you have
narrative
posts
or
on
topical
similar
narrative.
topics. I mean, it's like, okay, it's topical, but like no, like it's not like a structured like guide to your thought, or exclusively not even a guide to your thought in general, but just your solution to a unified field model.
Which is a not insignificant thing, and Jen's basically right on it. I mean, I used to go to Fermilab as a kid. I know a fair amount about particle physics. I know what's going on in these disciplines. I finally got around after, I was once featured on her blog because of something stupid I said in the Poopertarian spheres, the Poopertarian power plant blower up spheres. I don't know why I got lost down that rabbit hole. But then, I started looking at, the actual blog and spending some time with it. I'm like, and damn, this is right. I mean, how that, here's this woman getting piled on by all these people. She's treated as a kook. I sit here and actually read and go through most of her stuff, and I'm like, oh, like 80% of this just seems just damn right to me. I mean, yeah, it's just how it is.
Thank you, Gandalf, for actually reading the blog with an open mind. Because unfortunately, this issue that Vincent brings up is not an insubstantial one. That there is a bit of an issue with people who are actually trained in physics understanding what I'm even saying, because they have a certain worldview that includes things like the Big Bang and the strong and weak nuclear forces, which are false, and things like that are all basically getting in the way of them understanding it on a deeper level. So it's a sort of counterintuitive thing that people who didn't have formal physics training are actually they can understand the theory more easily. But unfortunately, there's been
Jeff
nobody.
Randall in the chat for what
Doovid,
would be
I'm in the middle of
$5.
explaining something here.
A non-scientist making declarative assertions about what is credible scientists. Astonishing.
Well, people can have opinions and such, but there is such a thing as an authoritative opinion, and the one who has the authority is the one whose results conform to science, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a scientist, like in the sense that the academy has given me some goddamn piece of paper, but I know a hell of a lot of science, and I'm conversant in a number of fields. Not many people can claim that. Jen knows what she's talking about, and I can tell a charlatan from not. And stuff like Big Bang is just obvious crap. I mean, the one astronomer in the last century that tried really hard to push back against the Big Bang was Halton Arp, and he was treated like absolute trash.
What you just said is not scientific. When you say, we know scientifically, studies have shown that people could tell who's lying less than half the time, and even experts who have studied the art of telling when someone's lying or not, like FBI training, the statistics still like maybe they're 70%, maybe the best people are 80% accurate. So even if it's saying like you're up there with the top FBI agents and reading people who are truthful or not, like you're still only talking like like a 1 out of 5 chance you're wrong on any given time, let alone your credentials to say. But I mean, if you were scientific, you would know that there is no phenomenon of someone who's good at telling charlatans, because the science has demonstrated that people are actually extremely poor at telling charlatans.
Well, you're comparing me to a mass of NPCs?
You're saying that's the essential human nature. So just like this, oh, I'm scientific because I have expertise. I went to the University of recognition of charlatans, and I have a PhD in recognizing charlatans. But no, like Doovid has actually read a few books and is calling you out on your own charlatanism, because if you had actually read the studies, you would know that the studies scientifically have shown that there is no such known phenomenon of a person who has some special ability to call out charlatans.
And do these people have the sum total of knowledge? Are these people who made these studies authoritative? Yes or no? I would say
But
that
if
is in
you're an
doubt.
authoritative expert on the study, like I would assume you would at least be familiar with what the other experts or the mainstream is saying about the issue. So here you're declaring expertise, and then at the same time, you're in complete incongruity with the what would be considered the current consensus of science on the issue. You're
And
saying,
just because
"Oh,
there's a
I'm
consensus
I'm a
doesn't mean it's
scientist
right.
because
There's a
I'm an
course.
expert in declaring who's a charlatan or not." And then, what's the current science show on the ability to determine whether people are being truthful or not? And it shows that there's very little hope to have some special human ability to determine whether a person's being truthful or not.
So just because all of these other people say, based on some studies that they've done, the construction of which and the
I'm
execution
saying your
thereof,
praises of
I have
Jennifer are
not
actually making her
validated.
look bad.
I have
Your
not
praises of
validated.
Jennifer actually make her look bad, because you're saying Jennifer's awesome because I have the scientific ability to determine who's a charlatan
Okay,
or not,
there's
and I know she's not a charlatan. And
most
then
of
you're
what's on
going
the
against.
blog. Most of what's on the blog is logical statements. Gandalf, being of higher IQ, is able to spot patterns faster and recognize logic. So he can tell what the logic is on the blog and recognize a deeper pattern that I'm an authority. So it's easy for him to, even though he only agrees with less than 100% of what I said, he says, well, default position is that Jen's right, and pending further investigation, if we disagree about something down the line, we'll talk about it, because I've made it clear that I do want people to confront me if there's something I've said that is illogical in some way. So what he's
That's a
recognizing,
valid strategy.
it's not something to do with my demeanor. It's something to do with him reading the blog, noticing that the logic is sound, and making his conclusions from that point on.
Yeah, but that's a valid strategy. I'm not saying he's wrong about his praises of you, but I'm saying his praise of you is actually an insult. It's like, saying that, like, oh, Jennifer is awesome because I have the uncanny ability to tell who's a charlatan or not, and I could tell she's not one of them. Like, that's actually kind of like a hidden insult. Like, relatively, it's not actually a praise, because what you're saying is essentially going against the scientific consensus, when there's so many more obvious ways. Like, if you wanted to praise you and your blog and your ideas, there's so many more obvious ways than than building up your own. You're saying I'm an authority because I have the special ability to determine who's a charlatan or not, and Jennifer is awesome because she's passed my not a charlatan test.
I've
You understand what I'm
learned.
saying here, Vince?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Vince,
no, I do see what you're saying. I just think that well, you're saying that you don't approve of the Academy because you don't approve of their model or the way they do things, but like you said, Jen says that her model makes predictions. So in science, everyone, you can't deny a prediction. If someone makes a prediction, they make a prediction. You can't deny that. If what you're saying is true, you should be able to take your scientific method, which differs from the mainstream scientific method. You should be able to take your scientific method and show other scientists that it is true. Science is about proving. You prove that you're true. So you should be able to use your method and be like, okay, this is the method I'm using. You should use this method, and let me show you, look at all these predictions I can make with it. And science should easily accept it. And the reason that you haven't done that so far is I don't know. Why haven't you been able to show these other scientists that your method works. I mean, it's pretty clear cut. If it makes predictions, it makes predictions. There shouldn't be any confusion there.
Well, it's not a method, it's a theory, and it conforms to Western scientific standards, and nobody can deny it. So I don't see what the problem is, really.
Well, okay, well, can we get other, I mean, can we at least get like as many physicists as possible to at least review it and we can get their opinions? I mean, we're not supposed to trust any physicist except for you?
You can trust whoever you want, dude, but go based on results, not based on someone's decoration.
Physicist. So I mean, I'm not a physicist, so I'm gonna have to turn to a physicist to get at least some kind of understanding or validation for it. So I mean, are you really saying that there's no physicist that we could give this to that has the ability to understand it or who is authoritative? Who's authoritative? You pick the authoritative person for us, and then let's hear them say that, yeah, they agree. Who's authoritative? Is Stephen Hawking's authoritative?
No.
Who is? Who is?
Stephen Hawking gets a lot of things right, but he's not
Only
authoritative.
Gandalf is authoritative because
No.
he's a self-declared expert on determining who's a charlatan or not.
Gandalf, who is authoritative?
You're spinning me off a little bit. Basically, the scientific establishment is such that you have to look at every single claim made by all of these people and judge it with a fine-tooth comb. And some people get more than half of stuff right, and some people get less half stuff right, and some people get almost everything wrong, and yet everyone seems to love and respect them.
Gandalf, who is an authority? Can you name an authoritative person that we can go to besides you?
I don't recognize most of the people in the academy as by default authoritative.
Is there anyone you do recognize? Do you have a name?
That is by default authoritative within the academy?
No, not anywhere. Anywhere in the world. Anywhere, any physicist or any person, I don't care what their degree is in. Is there anyone in this whole wide world that is authoritative enough? Do you have a name?
Well, who's the world's best physicist? It's always down to how do you validate someone's.
Is there anyone in the world besides Jen and Gandalf that can validate this that you trust? Is there anyone else on Earth that can do this besides you two?
I would need to vet them. I don't know these people. I don't know how they think. I need to be able to determine if they are legitimate or not. I need to vet them. Most people
as of now
don't come to me for vetting.
As of now, Jennifer is the only person that you've vetted as authoritative on the subject.
On physics, yes.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your endorsement to a great degree. Gandalf has the respect of many people in the community, as well as a lot of his own accomplishments and intellectual and other pursuits. And so this is sort of the process of establishing.
Are you kidding me?
The process of establishing oneself as an authority. It's a gradual thing, right? Like maybe I am an authority on physics and someone else decides I am, and so I have that prestige, and it's a gradual building thing. But the real mark is the inability of anybody to push back on your positions. That's the real mark of an expert. And really, this is bringing us to an extremely important subject, which is how do we validate testimony in the first place? Vincent, I'd be more than happy to let any physicist take a look at my theory and give any criticism they want. But the fact is, no one's going to be able to push back on this theory. It's designed to be a unified field model of minimum cardinality, which conforms to the scientific method of the West.
I would like to see someone's commentary on this and show me everyone's commentary. I don't just give me hundreds of commentary.
You find a physicist. You do it.
Come on. You guys are telling us, Gandalf, you are so arrogant to be telling us.
Now you're psychologizing me. You're not presenting me arguments. You're calling me arrogant, and you're not presenting me arguments.
You're telling us that you have to vet all these physicists to, I mean, why we have to, you're the authority?
I don't trust any authorities we have right now because our civilization is going into the ditch,
Why
Vincent.
should we trust you as an authority? Why should we trust you as an authority?
You don't have to.
Yeah,
he's just saying how he's just saying how he came about making his decision. He's not necessarily recommending that people should go about their decision-making process in the exact same way he did, but that's just what that was his decision-making.
Okay, Gandalf, there's no one else besides Jen. There's no one else in the world that has the ability or the credibility to critique this theory. It has to be besides Jen.
Why does there have to be someone besides Jen?
Because we're not.
The peer review. I mean, it's part of the current scientific method.
Yeah,
peer review.
And scientific progress and technological achievement is starting to grind to a halt. Peer review is
peer review.
Theory,
I mean, the current status of the world, the science community, you have the right to demand peer review. So you're saying like, no, like you're not going to do peer review.
We already know, number one, I have no peers, and number two, the peer review process is a way of keeping certain ideas out of the mainstream science. And that's why it was invented, and it itself fails the scientific method.
Well, so now you're going to pull like
Michael
a Claire
Polanyi, Republic of Science talks.
I mean, God forbid I don't picture
Jennifer
Jennifer doing that. So I mean, let's just move on because like we don't need Jennifer to pull a Claire Caw and like on her webpage it's going to be now endorsed by some false endorsement from like Ask the Rabbi that isn't even true. So like Jennifer, I don't even think she's not going to put in the corner of her blog endorsed by Gandalf.
Okay,
that's not her style. So we can just move on. Like we know Gandalf.
I don't want her to do that.
Jennifer, he's explained his reason. He's made his pitch for her to those in the audience that are considering following her thought or taking her thought more seriously or whatever. But yeah, I think we can move on.
Just quickly, because you brought up Claire and the endorsement. So the rabbi got back to me again. And so he didn't answer my question. I don't know why they do this all the time. He said the fact that secular Quranism is clearly being promoted as secular seems to put it outside the category of the Noahide Code. The Noahide Code is given by God with divine commandments and therefore is non-secular by definition.
Well, either way, God forbid that you would put a false claim to be endorsed by a false endorsement. If Jennifer put endorsed by Gandalf on her blog, I don't think that would be a false endorsement where Gandalf would be secretly sending an email out clarifying that he didn't really endorse her. By saying like, no, I don't predict that she's going to put endorsed by Gandalf on her blog.
Well, actually, I am looking to get the endorsement from the most intelligent Brahmin-like people in the West. So, yeah, Gandalf accepted my authority does mean a great deal to me.
But you're going to put that in a blog? You're going to have like a... I mean, you could be like a politician.
Well, I'm looking at it on a class level. I'm looking for this class of people to
you have like a wall of signatures and endorsements.
No, it's about a class of people and an intellectual culture and a philosophy being endorsed rather than an individual person. It's a set of ideas that it's endorsed.
But I'm talking like fact, blog, tab on your blog, endorsements, coming soon or not.
They're not coming soon because, like I said, it's a class. So that if, it'd be too many people to list, but it's my plan here is to basically get the endorsement of voluntary consent of the most intelligent and sensitive people in society to, back me up.
So,
okay.
Doovid, if I'm asked, who is probably the most authoritative person on physics because they have a unified field model and are breaking through a lot of the barriers toward advancement in the discipline, at least in terms of how they think and what they put out there, the answer is Church of Entropy.
I mean, if you did want to go about it, you would have to create a series of metrics and look at the people and compare them to metrics. But I think this conversation is past its productivity.
Yeah, you have to, what am I trying to say? Oh, fuck, I just lost what I was trying to say, sorry. Oh, right. There has to be someone else in the world that can understand this besides Jen. It's not fair for us to. It's not fair for Jen to be the only one in the world to understand it, and we're all just supposed to believe
Life
her.
isn't fair, and I understand a good part of it, and it makes sense to me. It's logically consistent, and
Yeah,
it
but
answers all sorts of questions that.
You think you're an authority because you've been streaming for 8 months. Do you know how stupid that sounds?
No, that doesn't make me an authority. I don't. Not because I've been streaming for 8 months. I've spent a lifetime being educated. Pretty much all I do want to devote my life to is learning.
People have.
That's all I do is devote myself to learning.
There's
I don't
a lot
do
of
anything
people who are
else.
a lot more educated than you who still can't understand.
Yeah, I'm more intelligent. I have more raw brain power and the will to be educated.
Okay, is there anyone outside of you two who can understand this theory?
I don't care
like,
if there's anyone outside of us two or not.
Of course there is. It's foolish to think there are people who agree with my theory. My theory is not that hard to agree with. I don't even think you know what my theory even is, Vincent, because it's pretty hard to disagree with.
I think you guys gotta organize like a separate stream for this, or like a series of streams, because like, yeah, like I'm not even sure like what are we talking about, what are we arguing about, like what's in this in relation to
it's a meta conversation. Basically, the question we're approaching here is what qualifies someone as an authority, which is where we should have started, rather than get into these, tangential things. We should have said, what are our acceptance criteria for expertise, and how do we evaluate them? That would have been a good place to start. And this conversation is sort of showing us the importance of that step as the first one. We got to nail down the axioms, as well as what are we accepting as valid testimony? Like, what is it that makes science? What is it that makes one thing science and one thing not science? What is it that makes something better science versus something else being not as good of science? These are important questions that we really need to take a step back and look at before we can actually see the truth of what's going on here.
Yeah, and then we could lead back to what we talked the last few weeks about money being representative of good karma. It's like a form of authority. You're saying authority is a form of. You're saying authority is not necessarily a form of karma. You're saying authority, or is authority, some form of accumulated good karma that good karma has been accumulated, and it could be accumulated in multiple forms. And money is very easy because like there's a transactional nature. Every time you make a transaction, like a certain amount of money changes hands, so it's very easy to conceptualize money and karma because the mathematical transactional nature that each thing has a certain number and a transaction to it, as where things like authority don't so neatly fit in with like a transactional numeric value, like what's the numeric value of this authority. But either case, I would assume that it's authority is some sort of accumulation of good karma.
The banks have printed like $7 trillion in the last 7 weeks now, and the world isn't $7 trillion richer in actual goods and services. If anything, there's been more war, rumors of war. There's a pandemic in China right now, and the United States continues to fracture culturally. So the fact that there's more money in the world now than there's ever been before doesn't seem to correlate at all to reduced human suffering and better human outcomes.
You keep on saying things that like really have nothing to do with the essential concepts by looking at global macroeconomic or economic ideas. The concept is very simple. Like money is an exact meant to be a marker for karma. Like when you work 10 hours and you get paid, you like a little gold or something. It doesn't matter if it's a fiat currency. If you want to say it was like a nugget of gold, you worked your 10 hours. That nugget of gold represents good karma. It represents what you acquired in the 10 hours of work. And in that sense, like, yes, money in any form, assets, is the representation of this accumulated good karma of basically work or productive transactions. And whatever macro level economic or complaint you have, that mechanism is basically obvious that's what money represents. Like, okay, you worked all week for me and now you got your check. You mean all week you accumulated good karma, and here's a numeric value estimate of the good karma that you accumulated in terms of money and authority. Although, like, you're not going to get a check and deposited in the bank, like a degree. It's accumulated good karma. Authority is basically like, oh, I have authority because I went to a good school and got good grades and got a degree in the subject. Like, that's authority. I have a documented degree, but what that's representative of is the accumulated good karma of guided study on the subject.
So if I kill a king that has a bunch of gold to take his gold, does that mean I get good karma out of that?
You're giving you're just allegorical or examples of a story by saying the essential concept of money, where you work all week and then you get something in terms of money as a payment for the work that you did. So you're saying, oh, there's other ways to accumulate money than the simple work method, but on the generic understanding of money and the work and the depositing of work, that is accumulated good karma, because work is accumulated good karma, and the money that you get is an exact signifier of how much you worked.
Well,
But
that
it's
might
not
be
when the
true
money
if it
supply
wasn't.
doesn't track productivity.
Yeah, that might be true if it wasn't a fiat currency system, but there's a decoupling for work and value.
Is fair, or the system's out of balance, or it's rigged, but you're not essentially, so I mean, you're categorically arguing with something that's irrelevant to my point. I'm just using the example of money is karma. So you're saying, oh, but the money system's all messed up. Oh, the money system doesn't operate like according to that way, where like you do a certain amount of thing for productive for society, and then you get some sort of token of recognition for what you did for society, and you could trade that token of what you did for society for other things. That essential understanding of the purpose of money is a model of the accumulation of karma.
It can't be, because the money system doesn't actually measure or stay in correlation with the actual amount of productivity in the economy. So there's no way that money can be an approximate metric for karma.
It does, because what do you get as the result of your work?
But that money, it doesn't represent, that money is not an accurate payment for that productivity.
Jennifer, what did you get as the result of your work when you worked?
A whole lot more than money, I can tell you that. And money was pretty much
check.
the last.
That was an essential element. That was an essential element where your work was measured, and as a result of that work, you got a check. That was an essential element of your work, right?
I have worked for money before. As a master, I'm able to manifest wealth, yes, but that does not mean that money can somehow be equated to karma.
Why did you get that check? What did that check represent when you got it? Why did they give you the check, and what was the check for, and what did it represent?
In exchange for services provided, obviously, that still doesn't make any coupling to karmatic value whatsoever.
And so, was it per hour that you got paid for the hour worked?
Well, I've had some salary jobs and some per hour jobs. I don't really see what the relevance is, because my value is not something that can be measured with money.
What the accumulation of karma? You mean service performed? You performed a service of productive value for somebody else, and in return you got paid.
What I'm saying is that the amount of money I have earned has no real bearing on my karma.
I'm not saying that, well, obviously everything's related, but I'm saying the mechanism of getting paid for work is similar to the mechanism of karma, that you work a certain amount of hours and you've accumulated something, and what you get, what you accumulate and you get that represents a trade-off for that accumulated value of your work is money.
Yeah, the cause is work.
Karma works in a
similar
way where you accumulate karma through activity. So authority comes from accumulated activity like study, like eventually getting a degree. So you're an authority because you accumulated, so to say, good karma by spending years of study, and then that years of study ended in authority.
Well, we could say that the cause is that you do some work and the effect is that you get some money. And since karma means cause and effect, then you can say, yeah, the cause was I did work and the effect was I got money. But that doesn't mean that someone's bank statements informs their personal karma, which is the sum total of all your actions, which money really has very little to do with at the end of the day.
Well, probably does a lot because most people work, and people on average, if they work 30, 40 hours a week, or what they do largely for money, compromises a large chunk of their life. Your average person who works most of their adulthood full time, you minus sleep, you're talking about a majority of their activity is towards work. And one of the most essential elements of the work, why do we work, is because we need money. So certainly of that karmatic equation, like money's not just some small thing. It's pretty it's one of the major.
Yeah, the money is a mark of my enslavement. I hate
Well, yes,
working for it. I hate spending it. I hate touching it. I wish we had a lot less money in society. A lot less money determining everything we did every single day.
Yeah, you hate your own karma.
No, I just hate mercantilist, materialist values and the fact that they are destroying and eviscerating everything else that's beautiful and wonderful about life and knowledge.
Well, that too, but you hate your own karma.
I think you're projecting, Doovid.
No, I'm not projecting, because I'm saying he's upset at his own karma. Whether I'm upset at my own karma or not, saying that's my interpretation of what Gandalf is saying. Like, okay, your karma does not
No,
include.
it's the opposite. He's going with his karma. If he was fighting against the knowledge and he was saying, no, I'm going to just keep on going with Kurt Poolittle and the shithead brigade, that would be bad karma. But because he's surrendered to the authority of the Veda, that's good karma. And it's nothing to do with money.
Well, because he has a big ego, and money represents the like the basically like this the his Achilles heel. Because like, if you're so awesome, where's the money, Gandalf? Like, I thought you're so smart and so great and such an authority. So how come
I don't care about the money, dude.
Fuck are you broke? I don't believe it's because you don't care that you're money. I think it's because you're a piece of shit failure. Because if not, and you're so smart, you would have money.
Have Brahmins been rich historically? No. They've mostly been quite poor because they transcend silly, trite, materialist things like money. It's bad karma to equate money to value, Doovid.
Of course it is. Money is the most easy thing to equate to value, because if Gandalf wanted to demonstrate his awesomeness, the accumulation of money is probably the single best method to demonstrate his awesomeness.
No, because I hate money.
No, you don't. You hate your own failure. And so you pretend you hate money when it's in reality you hate yourself. You hate your karma. You hate that you failed.
No, I'm not unhappy. I don't hate that I failed at all. You're projecting. You're totally wrong.
And we lost Vince. I heard this great story at the temple today where this guy was talking, two guys in the Himalayas, in Rishikesh, at the bottom of the Himalayas, that decided to become renunciates and live in caves, and they ended up living next to each other. And after decades, they have a few visitors, a few spiritual speakers that they occasionally spoke to, and then, I guess this was actually a true story. And then after like 30 years, one of these guys became like a famous holy man. All of a sudden, this man who lives in caves in the Himalayas, and people are traveling to ask him for advice and receive blessings, and travel into like any area and be a guest of honor. And the guy who's living in the cave next to him, God forbid he acquires a gun and killed him. And the question like went through his mind, that his mind told him he should kill this man. But a certain amount of karma, that like, let's say these two people had the same karma, it wasn't necessarily action reaction, that they both chose relatively the same path. And one guy, so to say, rose to greatness, and the other guy didn't achieve greatness. And the guy who didn't achieve greatness, God forbid, has the thought arise into his head to kill the person who did achieve greatness. But it was an interesting story, and interesting thought of karma and the fruit of labor, or something like that. So you say, okay, your money, like there's a fruit to your labor. The fruit of your labor is could be multifold, but the essential transaction that the fruit of your labor is a paycheck. So you might work your job and has all these benefits that you could say going to work gets, but the essential transaction of your job is a paycheck and maybe benefits like healthcare or something like that. But even that's more in line of essentially a paycheck. So like I'm not sure how you're understanding how these transactions work, and like how you're understanding the accumulation. Karma is like some form of accumulation of something. And if it's but I mean, reality, karma is going to be all inclusive. So it's all the formulas of the accumulations of all the various things that are possible to accumulate. So I mean, from a scientific level, just say like, well, that's obvious. Like karma obviously is going to be these equations that are predicting or measuring and balancing all these various different forces that are available here in the world, and we should be trying to uncover what these equations are and what these forces are, and the various languages, and the hold up on money or whatever. You could have your opinion on, that's fine. You could have your understanding working at karma, but in terms of a mathematical or system for understanding it, the monetary transaction seems to be probably one of the best parallels, if not the best parallel, to how a system of karma would work.
Are you sure you're not just saying that because Jews have a lot of money, Doovid?
Well, I'm saying Jews, it's the cause and effect. Because Jews understand karma like that, they accumulate money, and it's easy. And like, okay, because Gandalf does not understand karma like that, money always eludes him. And like, even though he's so smart, he will never be smart enough to accumulate money.
I just don't want to apply my smarts to figuring out how to gamble on the stock market.
But I mean, you
'Cause
wouldn't.
I hate gambling.
You're not smart in the way that a Jew is smart. And even with all your IQ, the accumulation of money is probably just beyond you.
No, it's not beyond me. It's just something I find distasteful and disgusting, and I don't want to live in a society where that kind of money making is seen as so privileged, because I think it's just a low and disgusting behavior, when I'd rather have a society much more devoted to art, to science, to knowledge, to philosophy, and to things that have not much to do with commerce.
Exactly.
I don't place commercial values very high. I want them to be very low values in any society that I'm a part of. They're necessary evils, not things to which we are tied to via a ball and chain.
I mean, hence you'll always fail in financial endeavors.
I'm not looking to succeed in financial endeavors either, so I don't care.
You agree that like the accumulation of money is unlikely something that you're going to see in your lifetime.
I'm probably never going to be super rich in terms of the Fed buck system, no.
Okay.
Well, it would be considered bad karma to accumulate a lot of money if one wanted to undertake a priestly life, according to Dharma, Doovid.
Well, yeah, but in your stage of life, eventually to renunciate. But in order to, if you plan on having a family, you'll have to fulfill your dharma of the family stage of life. And that will include taking care of your family. You'll have to make money in order to take care of your family, even though after you've done that, you plan on taking sannyas and renouncing everything, or saying like, no, he's going to be from the rare people that becomes a priest at an early age and never develops a family or wealth to renounce.
Well, priesthood never held the majority of the wealth in traditional Indian society. Why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, you're talking about like the temple treasury, in the sense you're talking like the your tax farmers, and I mean like or the king. If you're talking, where is the king in terms of it? And if the king has a royal treasurer, the storehouse of all wealth is in a royal system. You have a different Vedic or systems in traditional Indian life that could include a temple storage, like those temples that have billions and billions of dollars of gold. And then in the sense that the priests don't own the gold is owned by the deities of the temple, but the priests are still the custodians of the gold that is within the temple. Or if you have a royal system where you might even have a coinage and a monetary system, but the monarchy would be the house. Or even if you had some sort of democratic society and your banking. But I don't see I think all those possibilities are possible under Vedic systems.
Well, money is considered a distraction from spirituality. So anyone who's looking to accumulate money while claiming to be practicing spirituality is actually going about it wrong, which would be bad karma.
Yeah, but
Very
we're not
bad karma.
trading. So I mean, money is a reality of society, and for the people who want to dedicate themselves completely to spirituality, they might have to completely detach themselves from money. But it's not like they suggest like everybody should denounce money, because money is recognized as an integral part of a functioning society.
A functioning society only works when there is a proper delegation of duty or sharing of duties, and the spiritual duty and the holding wealth duty have to be held by different classes, because money distracts from spirituality. The acquisition of money distracts from spirituality.
Yeah, I mean, because it's a look at karma. So when you make a transaction and you say, I demand something in return for that, and whether it's, like barter, even saying, okay, the utility of money as opposed to bartering, so like in a true spiritual system, it'd be barter, not money, is unclear, because barter.
I never said that. I didn't. I said it in a. There wouldn't be usury in an actual dharmic system, no. But I mean, just the mercantilism itself is lower karma than the Kshatriyas and the Brahmins, right? Because the merchants are the third rung on the Varna scale.
Well, I mean, where you had begging, I guess, if you just say like people would get what they deserve, and it wouldn't be based on monetary transaction, where like this is my product and it's here to sell to whoever gives me the money, that it would be, this is my product and it's here for whoever deserves it. And if you come and like, I see the karma that you deserve it, and somehow you'd have a perfect society where people's karma is just people give them what they deserve, and you don't require some sort of marker of a monetary transaction to record what people have taken from each other's karma.
Well, in a system with no usury or fiscal parasitism, those with better karma would accumulate more money because they would have better work ethic. So that's true, but that's not the system we live in right now. And to try to draw a parallel between those two is like comically insincere.
Yeah, but you're making a mark about the present state of society in bad karma, but the essential science of karma is very similar to the science of money. So saying but
it's really not at all in any way, shape, or form the same thing at all. See that this is why it's not possible for your statement to be true, is that Jews understand money really well. If they understand money, karma as well as they understand money, how come they don't have a unified field model? And in fact, have a bunch of research that denies a unified field model and is anti-scientific, like the Big Bang, the Gödel incompleteness theorem, and a bunch of other theories I could mention that were promoted by Jewish interests.
Yeah, those are just theories of Jews. I mean, if you're talking like Jewish theory and you mean the Kabbalah is essentially a unified field model. I mean, the whole essence of the Kabbalah.
It's not, because it doesn't make all predictions. It's not a unified field model because it doesn't make all the predictions, and it makes false statements.
By definition, like I sang that song, like like the one, the uniqueness, the unified.
That's not a unified field model. A unified field model has to make all predictions. A unified field model has to make all predictions and have no
field model is not the unity of all unities.
No, it has to make all predictions. It has a very specific definition. In order to make all predictions, it must not have any singularities. And since the Big Bang
is the unified field model the unity of all unities, or not?
Since the Big Bang comes from Kabbalah and is itself a singularity, that is disqualifying anything from being a unified field model.
Is the unified field model the unity of unities or not?
It's not a unified field model because it has a contradiction in it, at least one.
The unity of unities? The unification of unification?
That statement basically is just word salad. So to be a unified field model, it would need to say, give definitions, make predictions, and explain why no predictions fall outside of its scope. And since it contains the Big Bang, which is false, nothing can be
But
said to be a unified
okay, you
field
could
model.
interpret it that way, but that's what the Kabbalah is meant to be. The Kabbalah is, in essence, an attempt at a unified field model. I mean, you could write your critique on the Kabbalah, but then you're like, no, I mean, the Kabbalah is your competition. The Kabbalah is a unified field model, and just like when you eventually publish yours in a standardized way, the Kabbalist or whoever could criticize yours. The Kabbalah is already well written and documented. So if you want to produce your criticism on the Kabbalah,
Well, they're not
feel
going to
free.
publish what I'm saying because it's going to contradict the Kabbalah. That's why they don't publish stuff that goes against the Big Bang. Well, now they're forced to because they're basically their backs are up against a wall.
Probably tens of thousands of pages right behind me of Kabbalistic writing.
We don't consider the written word authoritative.
Well, obviously you don't. I mean, that's your belief system. By saying like, yes, I mean the Kabbalah is a competitive, unified field model system. Like, I mean, obviously you're supporting your own theory. Like, no, like I don't expect you to step down and be like, well, actually my unified field model is second best according to the Kabbalah.
Well, it would have to make all the predictions.
You're saying like, therefore, you have to explain like why you guys don't control the money. He was like, well, if the Jewish unified field model works so well that they control the money, and my unified field model works so well that we're broke.
So if I control the money supply, then you'll accept me as an. So if I somehow. So if I somehow.
You're going to be perpetually
If
broke,
I somehow.
or you're going to take
control,
the Jewish unified field model, that means you're going to control the money.
So if I can somehow take over the central banks, you'll bow to my authority. Is that right?
Well, it definitely weigh in the factor. Certainly it's pretty difficult to believe a unified field model that makes you perpetually broke.
If I took over the banks instead of Jed, okay, I would take all the cash out of the vault and burn 99% of it in the world's biggest bonfire. And we'd print trillions of dollars and cut down many forests just to burn that much cash. I hate money as a metric for all these things that much. We will not be living under a mercantilist society. A Gandalfian dictatorship will not tolerate mercantilist values being given the pride of place as if mercantilist values are fit for a priestly caste.
Did I mention I spoke on Friday offline to Justin Murphy from The Other Life, in an interesting conversation, which we could talk about, but just relate to this. He's got his streaming, he's pushing it, he's moving into IRL, he's going to be in LA, and he's renting a mansion for a meetup party. And that's where he's saying, like, okay, is the Church of Entropy unified field model that going to require that you're perpetually broke and are never going to be renting out a mansion for your entropist party, or is saying you're going to have a Judeo slant to your unified field model and be like, yes, I have a unified field model, and accumulating money is part of the the understanding of karma, and so should I so desire to accumulate money, I will, and we will rent out mansions and have awesome parties and not be perpetually broke.
No, it'll be like It's a Wonderful Life, and the whole town will just decide to throw us a party anyway because they think we're just so cool, and they won't care about how much money it costs or doesn't cost.
There's a comment in the chat from Harshit Pant saying money in temple is not going to the priests. It's a dead capital. Priest gets salary from the king, right? So that's how it's supposed to be done.
Pretty much.
This other LARPing is terrible karma.
Yeah, but it's
Absolutely.
still saying that there's
And Gandalf's library will be funded by the state, and it'll be entrusted to me by the state.
if you want to make a
I'll use it
parallel with the
for the
Federal
state.
Reserve, I mean, just back to Harshit's point about if you want to compare it to the Federal Reserve, the priests, even whether they get paid from the king and they don't take their money directly from the treasury, because the purpose of the treasury from the priest is to the ornaments, the gold is stored in the temple, and the gold are used as ornaments for the deities. But at the end of the day, it is the priest who are controlling the gold. Even though like that might not be their salary in the terms of the gold as the means of commerce, but in the system, like any excess gold is going to be used as ornaments for the deities, and only the priests are going to be allowed to touch the gold and put those ornaments on the deities. And like obviously they don't cut like a little piece of the gold from the deity's ornament and take home to pay their bills. They get a check from the king.
Hold on just a second. Just Another Hindu is still in on find someone else other than Gandalf and Jen to validate these theories. You do it, Vincent. Not my job. I don't respect any of these people anyway.
The better plan would be to find someone to disprove the theory, because if it's wrong, shouldn't be too hard to find someone who can disprove it, should it?
Nope, shouldn't be. Just find someone that can can either disprove Jen's unified field model or do one that's more logically sound. I'll wait.
Okay. So just moving things along. So I think I'm supposed to be on Adam Green. Pretty sure tomorrow night, 7 o'clock, I'm going to be on Adam Green. Just me and him talking like Russia, Israel politics. So, maybe like rising anti-Semitism, Chabad, or any of those subjects. Anyone who's interested in that could tune in. I don't
7
know if
Eastern or 7 Central?
I mean, he said 4 o'clock West, 4 o'clock Pacific, which will be 7 o'clock Eastern, my time 7, but 4 o'clock,
my time.
4 o'clock live because he's in California. I mean, I had things like we talk about like anti-Semitism, but we keep seem to be getting stuck on these few subjects. I had more slides on quantum physics. We don't have to do them. But like I did think it was positive to have like a formal educational part of the scream, and also on Jennifer's appearance on Halsey. We did the post show, but if you want to talk about that, and I was mentioning to Jennifer before the show started, just the pure science of what is entropy, and this theory of the scientists that the origins of life, and talking about the nature of heat coming from the sun, or is it order coming from the sun, where it's not just heat. You can't just apply heat and expect order to arise from the application of heat, but maybe if you apply heat like an ordered structure way, and then I guess the actual nature of heat, where to some extent, like heat that we think about in temperature is actually a phenomenon of movement, and entropy of itself. Could you consider heat or coolness as a form of order? So I don't know if you wanted to discuss that in terms of anything at all of your JF Halsey appearance, or in relation to some of the scientific concepts that you didn't have a chance to go enough into on that show.
Well, I'll give you one sentence summary.
Entropy.
A 1-sentence summary that I learned from it. Halsey can't think 3-dimensionally.
I'll play a clip from the show I was on this week. I was on Halsey News Network with JF. We talked about the origin of life. It was pretty interesting, so I'll play a little bit of that if you guys don't mind muting. I got that all ready here. We can tune in and see what was said.
Okay.
Hope you enjoy.
So
I feel like we got off track from the original point of this, which was the adjacent states.
No. Before we go back to this, I want to get to Crazy Town. I want to follow you there, but I understand nothing of what you're saying.
In the future, if you go against what I'm saying, just telling you. Everyone who's ever gone against what I'm saying has regretted it.
Okay.
So I'm just saying, why are you doing this to yourself?
Oh, I'm going to
wait. Let
look
him ask.
bad
Let
in
him
the
ask a
literature.
question. Come on.
They're gonna watch this conversation 200 years from now and say JF was wrong.
They're going to say, I can't believe these people didn't understand what Jen was saying. There are people who are doing that right now.
I really want
about this show.
I want to get into Crazy Town, but we're talking about a bacteria. You're saying there's a sphere. This sphere does not exist in the physical world. It's electromagnetic potential. Can we observe that potential? What is it? How do I measure the sphere of a bacterium?
You can measure the electromagnetic field around a human. I'm not sure if there's anything sensitive enough to observe that, but it's possible. I never thought to doubt its existence.
So you're saying that there's an electromagnetic sphere that represents bacteria, but that you've never recorded it? And it tells us nothing about any factual observation we've ever made in the physical world?
Well, it certainly explains why life differs from non-life, which is something a lot of other people, possibly everyone, has failed so far to do.
Oh, I can explain why life differs from non-life. Life replicates. Life forms have ancestors. That's how it differs. It's not electromagnetic. It's not a sphere. It's not a 8 twist. It's just that it replicates.
Okay, well, like I said, the theory does make the predictions. It's just, if you can't accept the axiom that the mind's a quantum computer, it's going to be hard to proceed because the filling of the adjacent states has to do with that basic formalism. Because it's not just a sphere, it's all the, like, I'm not sure how much you know about energetic states. You know some chemistry, like you know how there's different arrays for the hydrogen energies? They all look different.
Yeah.
Yeah, so those are quantum states. They're very simplistic quantum states. They exist. They have a geometry to them. And the same is true for the mind. The mind is a sphere, but it's a modulated sphere, and what modulates it is the physical shape of the body. It predicts a lot of stuff. It predicts why the heart.
And we hope you enjoyed that. We'll come back to the show real quick. Whoops. I'll try to find the got so many links here. Yeah, so welcome back to the show. I just wanted to
Don't mean to interrupt, but Vincent saying I don't know any top scientists. I sat in Dr. James Hansen's office one time. I've met top scientists. This is an insane line of questioning, and I'm getting a little tired of it. If just another Hindu has a scientist he can bring on, and he's willing to have that scientist submit to a formal debate, let's do it. If not, I can't validate the authority of any of these people other than that they've published in a lot of journals by a lot of their so-called peers that all mutually mentally masturbate to one another. We can't prove anything beyond that. Published in a lot of journals by a lot of their so-called
Gandalf.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, you're telling me what I'm doing is insane line of questioning. I'm asking you for the name of a scientist that you think is credible that has looked at Jen's paper.
We got to move on, guys. Like, I hereby, God forbid, sentence you to another 3 months of streaming with Claire, or something. Like, we got to move on. You guys, like, do your make your own streams or something. Like, it's an important topic, but like, we got to move on.
Okay, I know you mentioned you wanted to talk about the model, so I guess I didn't really get to like fully explaining it from start to finish because that probably would have taken an hour. But if anyone's interested in understanding how life came about in general, there's several articles on the blog that will explain it. Basically, what it boils down to is the atmosphere is a three-dimensional lens around the world that creates a situation where there's a constant funneling of solar energy that is unable to escape to any large extent. So there's always like a net gain of solar energy coming in from the sun. And the fact that the atmosphere is bounded to the planet through the moon, which that fact apparently was too much for JF to get his head around, because I guess he'd never heard of the moon being the binding force for the Earth bound water, which seems a bit strange. So there's a lot of reasons not to accept mainstream science as credible, right? Like they can't make a whole heck of a lot of predictions, and some of their theories are like can literally be falsified conclusively. So, but they don't abandon them.
And I was I was involved on the policy and politics side of environmental science, particularly climate change, and I was having all sorts of problems, even though I believed in the moral impetus, I guess, behind the climate change movement. I was having lots of problems with the science and how it tried to validate itself and establish its own credibility, that it kind of drove me mentally insane.
A worthy topic, but like the opinions on the current status of mainstream science, like I'm not sure like if we're getting sidetracked or like it's like what are we even talking about, or it's going to go back to you and Vince need to get a room so you could argue about what is authority.
Well, what is authority is the absolute most essential question.
Yes, I think like you
need to be skeptical.
You gotta make a stream of that, or you're talking about it, but saying like to keep on going in circles, or these conversations where you're just going like on a tangential ramble that at best is just vaguely related to the topic at hand. Like your opinions on the current science establishment or something.
Well, establishing authority is pretty much the most important thing that we're doing. So it always comes back to a question of who's the authority on a particular subject and why. Right?
Yeah, and saying that like I mean, so we like even amongst us, we have basically no agreement or whatever. Whether there's a method. I mean, you like the truth function type thing, which authority would come to some sort of truth function where your probability or ranking list of credibility for authority based on past.
Well, we could do that. We could do that, but for some reason we haven't done that. Probably because I'll win no matter what standard.
Subject and like talking about like just random stuff.
Well, I'm fine to talk about establishing a testimonial authority. I spent my whole life building up for the moment of establishing my testimonial authority. Basically, everything I've ever done has been for that purpose. So, yeah, I would like to see someone push back against my testimonial authority because it would be funny. But yeah, we can move on to a different subject. We haven't covered the outbreak of the coronavirus, which happened or hit the chans this week, as well as the mainstream media. So did anyone want to talk about that, or if they'd heard anything that was maybe they thought was an important piece of information to share regarding that?
Well, for one thing, I've seen a lot of the social media videos being leaked out of China. And in Wuhan and at least 3 cities surrounding it, all the hospital beds are full, and the Chinese government is building new hospitals on the fly and basically employing an army of construction workers from around that entire gigantic country to build new hospitals to put new people with flu-like symptoms in there, and they're basically quarantining up to 50 million people. So something is off. Wuhan also happens to be a center for bioweapons research in China. So something, with either the Chinese military, Chinese government, foreign intelligence, Canada, CIA, maybe Mossad could be involved. We don't know. At least I haven't gotten a firm opinion on that, but it looks like this disease is very serious. And if the current system was more competent, we'd be, shutting down the borders right now and getting a much better handle on it, because I don't think our current system is competent enough to even know what to do. Like, I just am so skeptical about all of these people that claim to have authority because they just can't seem to, handle disease outbreaks. They can't seem to repair infrastructure. They can't seem to keep borders going. They can't seem to be keeping society cohesive. I mean, this coronavirus is exposing all sorts of holes in the system of the type that have concerned me for a number of years now. And, I think it's a 5-alarm fire on some respect. I mean, the system needs to be run a lot better with a lot more sober-minded, caring people in charge of it. And this crisis is revealing that we not only have a crisis of public health vis-a-vis this particular virus, but we have a crisis of general political authority that is being revealed by this and other events.
What about you, Doovid? Did you have anything you wanted to share, or you haven't really been following the story?
I read the basics. I didn't have any expertise, saying like, God forbid you see the fragile state, like, like on our own personal, like I probably connected to like rising anti-Semitism and just the breaking down of the fabric of human interaction in general that could lead to disasters of any form. So like if you measure it through like like why is anti-Semitism rising or something, like so why is society falling apart, and why is the cooperative spirit among man, and therefore God forbid God communicates to man or karma accumulates. So there's some sort of break in the accumulated karma among mankind that is sending us warnings that we could have imminent disaster, and that could come in any forms. Like karma's beyond human prediction. So like if the humankind has behaved in such a way that our karma means God forbid there's going to be some sort of mass disaster and calamity. And the terms like, okay, like I'm just worried about anti-Semitism, people turning against the Jews or whatever, but like also God forbid a virus could break out and people could die horrible biological deaths, and things like that have happened in the past. And certainly like I'm a scientist, but I believe in God and spiritual forces, and if God wanted to send a virus that top science has no answer for, God could send a virus, and not even say like God sending, if karma demands that, catastrophe hit mankind, like in the form of a virus that the current state of science and government and everything won't be able to stop. And I've taken a lot of courses like that on edX, actually global health and things like outbreaks and quarantines. And like, like obviously like, okay, like Trump wanted to close immigration to certain countries because, like Muslims, we got to stop the border to figure out what the hell is going on. And now you're saying like, no, we got to close the border because like there's infectious diseases and people's like skins are melting off, God forbid, and they're dying like horrible, painful deaths. And if you don't close the border, like, God forbid the person next to you, like their skin might melt off and they might, suffer a horrible death.
Yeah, a responsible government, when there's an epidemic like this where we don't have all the facts, and I'm imagining that if I were a dictator right now and I had the accepted quote unquote authorities of public health, that they wouldn't know their head from their ass, and so I would have such limited information. And since if I were dictator, my job would be to protect the public, I'd be ordering all the seaports on the West Coast closed and all flights heading to Asia, particularly to China, canceled. And I do it in such a way as not to alarm the public, and I'd have my PR and propaganda people doing that, and that would be done within 24 hours. And the fact that this isn't being done right now shows that we have a government that's either incompetent, distracted, or malevolent. That's the only. That's all you can conclude.
We would, I mean, say like, okay, like I would rather die than give the authority to some power to have that authority over me. So like, even though the President Trump calls out, saying like all airports are closed and like it's for your own good because if you don't, we're gonna die. It's like, no, like you can't have authority. You have to have understanding among humankind how to deal with these things. And if you need the authority to step in And also, free will is very limited. There's bounding conditions upon a people's ability to make changes, and people can't change that quickly. So even if it was a situation, God forbid, life or death, where people, in a pure fight or flight situation, they can't make a super huge life adapting changes that quickly, even in the case of death. So like, God forbid, if it's this type of calamity that could cause mass extinction level casualties, I would not turn to the government or authority, and would probably be in the distrust, skeptical, even, like, if the government starts closing down borders or starts taking people's freedoms away in order to take the spread of a virus. I would rather take my chances with the virus than with the government.
Yeah, that's with this government, yes. But if we had a competent and caring government that gave a shit about the heritage American populations, which is all I really care about, the masses and the laity would trust the government to do what's right, because the government would be totally devoted to the laity.
You're sentencing yourself to 3 more months of Claire. God forbid, you're really just going to sentence yourself to like 3 more months of streaming with Claire. Because if you turn into like the same, like at the end of everything, you're not talking about the issue, you're just repeating like your stump speech, which is your social criticism, where it's like the answer to any question on every issue. You have to keep on repeating your social criticism and stump speech, which might have some value, but like I don't see like with the issue. So we were supposed to be talking about the coronavirus, and like instead, like you're just repeating your stump speech about the ills of society, and like the reason this is happening is because people haven't listened to your recommendations about how to cure the ills of society.
Well, I didn't say that. You put that word in my mouth. I'm just saying that the virus would not be a problem. I think we have at least half a dozen infections. There's a couple in my hometown already of this virus. We have this because we have incompetent and or malevolent authorities that aren't doing what's necessary to solve the problem. I'm very results driven, and the first thing that needs to be done.
So. I'm saying as of now, we don't have the information. We don't know why we have this. So if you knew that, if you just take like a management approach, like something's wrong, it's your fault. A facts-driven case, like, no, we don't know as of now that there's been incompetence, and that the spread or even what's causing this is due to the incompetence of, or even that you could have had a system designed, because we don't really know what's going on yet as of now. Like, I've seen the evidence that you could have seen, like, oh, it's because the system was designed poorly that this happened, or there's a flaw in the implementation of the properly designed system. This never would have happened. Like, no, I haven't read that. I haven't been seeing that.
But I mean, we see in the case of the one person in Paris who got there. I mean, she got there by lying to the French authorities. The French authorities didn't think to check the person for flu-like symptoms right after everything had been found out. I mean, that's incompetence. When there's news of a major disease outbreak in a city that has a major bioweapons lab, and China's had this kind of issue before, just about a decade and a half ago, the moment like someone comes from China on a flight to your country that's exhibiting any kind of strange symptoms, that's time to shut down all travel to that part of the world. That's just what you do. I mean, that's step number one. I mean, if you don't realize that step number one, you're not prepared to deal with any epidemic situation whatsoever.
Yeah, no, I don't think people are going to be very hesitant to close down travel or commerce from a whole country, especially a big country. Like you'd have to, even with people dying, like you saying, even if you had much larger amounts of deaths, you said, like, closing down travel to a whole country is a huge deal. Like, even at the case where hundreds of people are dying. So if you had reason to believe, like, no, this could get bad and there could be mass casualties, like hundreds of thousands of people, but even if you were going to tell me, like, okay, it could be thousands of people are going to die, that still you'd be like, okay, like I'm not going to close down, travel between countries that would completely disrupt international economics and things just because a few thousand people are going to die.
Yeah, well, the last two epidemics that killed tens, if not hundreds of millions of Europeans in the last 5 or 6 centuries both came from China. So anytime there's a virus coming from China, which has, they have a history of zoonotic diseases of this type, you close down everything coming to and from China. That's what you do. I mean, if you're going to preserve tens of millions of European lives, that's what you do.
That's not what they did. They blamed the Jews, and only science later figured out hundreds of years later that it came from China.
That's got nothing to do with it.
The Europeans did not. They were not good scientists, and they just blamed the Jews.
Well, I don't care whether the Europeans blamed the Jews centuries ago or not. We just know the science now. And based on the science, if there's some sort of weird zoonotic virus coming from China, a competent European leader would be shutting down all travel and trade between the U.S. and China.
I mean, you still haven't established that a competent ruler, because you'd have to, quantify like what means a competent ruler, and what's the state of like how many deaths, how much catastrophe does it pay to shut down, travel and commerce, especially if like China, where you have a huge reliance on commerce. So you haven't even established that even if it meant thousands of people were going to die, that you should close it down. You say, okay, like God forbid if 30% of Europe were going to die, like the plague or something, that maybe it pays to shut down commerce. But if it's just going to be a few thousand people dying, it probably doesn't pay to shut down commerce.
I don't look at it as utilitarian. I look at the life of every European lost as a tragedy, and every single potential European death is to be avoided at all costs. That's what someone who loves the people.
You're talking utility of the trade with China is, from the European perspective, the trade with China and all the stuff that they rely upon from international trade with China. That the utility, God forbid, of a few thousand people dying of some virus, and we don't. It's not even a few thousand as of now. I don't think there's been any deaths outside of China. But even if you're talking hundreds of deaths, that the utility of closing down trade with China might be, God forbid, outweigh a few hundred deaths.
No, not worth the risk. European lives are sacred to me. Trade with China is not.
European, but you're just making a incoherent statement. European lives are sacred to you, therefore you can't risk closing down their supply chain of trade with China. You say like, no, it's you don't give a shit about the European people, and you're willing to close down the trade and fuck up their markets because you're paranoid about a few people dying.
We can always reorganize markets and move production back.
You can always have more babies. You can always repopulate.
I don't want to do that. I want to preserve European lives, and protecting us from epidemics and controlling the downside risk is the responsibility of a rightful king or ruler.
Okay, that's why the only election you ran for, you lost to OV.
Yeah, and I lost to a Nazi. I mean, what does that tell you? And Rufus the Jew was like the deciding vote that moved the rest of the chat over to OV. That was embarrassing. This is Europeans hate themselves or don't know how to love themselves so much they can't understand a ruler who would actually give a shit about them. This is how badly the condition of European psyche is, and it's an absolute disaster. It's a tragedy. It bothers me and keeps me up every night.
Okay, you got anything with this virus, or you just wait to see? We'll see where it's holding next week.
Well, I've been browsing Poll a lot lately about it because I'm interested from a meta-analysis perspective to study how people handle new information and new things that are coming up. And I was looking at a couple of factors. I don't want to make any, sweeping statements because it's hard to validate a lot of this evidence. I know there's been a lot of video stuff coming out, but it's hard to know when that was created. There's a lot of videos of people fainting. We don't know, did they faint because they were tired? Did they faint because they were sick? It's just hard to tell with a lot of this evidence coming out of China whether it's representing what it's purporting to represent. So there have been several scares, like pandemic scares in my lifetime. I'm just trying to remember Ebola, SARS. I'm sure there's a couple more we can all think of. And those... Yeah, there you go. West Nile, there was another one. So there's been a bit of panic that has been stoked throughout the years, and those things haven't turned into global pandemics that were really cataclysmic for the markets or for anything else. So I'm interested to sort of watch this one develop because it does appear to have a higher, I forget what it's called, but it was there was a rate for
Death
maybe one of
rate,
you guys can remember. I don't think it was a death rate. It was some sort of ratio that has to do with
contamination. I mean, the ratio
communicable
of people
illnesses.
contaminated to dying, or the ratio of people exposed to to infected.
I can't actually remember, but it was something like the Spanish flu was 1.8 and this coronavirus is 3.6 or something. So it has a higher. I'm sorry, I forget which one it is, but this number appears to have been validated by several sources that it is
Yeah, I mean,
both.
JF covered that, and when he was talking about like you could have the ratio of deaths to infected, and you also have a ratio of exposed to infected. Like, okay, so if you're talking, how contagious is it if someone came from China and they were infected? What does it mean to be exposed? Is it transferred through the air? We had a measles outbreak here in America, and it was specifically effective among Orthodox Jews, who there's segments of Orthodox Jews that don't like getting vaccines. So even in the local kosher restaurants here in Metro Detroit, there were a few cases of measles, and there was exposure. But measles is the type thing that they say, like it and that I don't may not be a virus. It may be a different. It's not caused by a virus, but it's something that stays in the air for a few days. So if someone with measles was in the area and coughed or something, you could potentially catch it by being in a contaminated area, and then there would be a certain percentage of like how many people that were exposed to it got infected. And then as like, God forbid, the people who get infected, there might be levels like, AIDS, you're HIV positive versus having AIDS, and then versus death. So all these things are measured in, bioinformatics.
Yeah, so I'm interested in from like a more sociological perspective, and it is important to study this type of thing because it forces us to ask the questions like, what's more important, human life, human suffering, or commerce? And those are important questions to answer because maybe some of our values aren't a little out of whack in the modern day. And I guess another thing that concerns me about this particular virus is that it appears to have quite a long incubation period, and apparently people they can communicate the disease before they actually show symptoms. So
Often by months, sometimes. It could be anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks up to almost 2 months of incubation, depending upon some estimates that are out there. And on that R to the 3.8 figure, I have a geneticist friend and a registered nurse friend that their own feeling, because they're looking at some of the conflicting reports, and we were sending around, various screenshots and articles, and they both have a good ear on a number of these kinds of things, and they think it's twice as bad as that already.
Yeah, as far as I've seen, like, there's just not enough information. And, if they have the virus and they're studying it, and there hasn't been deaths outside of China, and I don't know, like, as it hasn't really hit my radar, much besides like the articles, like to be scares or like a panic, like even like Gandalf, saying like, oh, you got to close down the transportation or something. It didn't really hit my radar like that to even think like people were considering, worrying about contamination, people who may have been China and they're going to bring it over to the U.S. Or, I mean, generally I'm living by providence and, acceptor of karma. So if I have bad karma, it will be administered to me, through processes, God forbid. And, like, God forbid, if I'm condemned to death, there's many ways that my sentence could be delivered, God forbid, be the hand of violence or sickness or accident or tragedy of any form. So, that's not really the way I analyze these issues. I would look at, kind of, just to do the best of our ability to try to understand the current state of karma. And that's, really the best we could do when we say, like, why are these things happening? It's like, why is anti-Semitism rising? Like, why is this happening? And then you could have like, well, I know, dumbass, like, let me write a whole book and explain to you why this is happening. because like I'm an expert on karma, and I'm going to break down to you the current state of karma, and that action reaction, and that to you this may be ununderstandable, but if you knew a clear history of karma, you could see that this is just the long result of a bunch of action reaction cause and effects.
Yeah, I guess the thing I'm interested in is regards, well, I mean, obviously my own personal safety. I don't want to get sick from this virus, but and I don't want anyone else to get sick from it. But I'm interested in sort of the crowd psychology of it, because people tend to get pretty hysterical on 4chan. I'm guessing you don't really browse 4chan, but I like to take a look at it just to see like what people are curious about, what's being promoted there, and what people's opinions are. And one thing that's a bit fascinating for me is this tendency people have to jump to the absolute worst possible conclusion with incomplete evidence. And I've been grabbing some screenshots from 4chan of these like fear porn type posts about the virus.
So, like,
That,
we're all gonna die, and like I was just
yeah,
like the plague
so
or
stuff
something.
like that. Yeah,
Supposedly
like
the plague caused like a
doomsday
horrible
stuff.
suffering death. I mean, like from our evidence, what we know about the plague in Europe, that like it wasn't necessarily comparable to what's happening here in China. Like God forbid people are dying, but the plague caused like prolonged like suffering where people's like skin melted.
Well,
Yeah,
the
I
one
don't think I don't think a lot, the mortality rate was high, but the infection rate was high with the plague. So it really like kneecapped the population for a while. Go ahead, Gandalf.
Yeah, see, the hysteria comes from the fact, right? We've had since the financial crisis, if not the Iraq War and before, we've had exceptionally incompetent government. People don't trust that their authorities care for them. We can't get the public health system fixed, and we can't maintain the borders. Those are two essential things that the government has to do correctly. And the U.S. government, by all objective measures, has completely failed on these metrics. And with a major disease happening in China at the time of the Chinese New Year, when you have tons of Chinese denizens living in our midst, traveling to and from infected areas, people are freaked out because our government isn't doing what it should be doing in a precautionary sense in order to limit the risk of disease spreading.
I mean, like at least according to the mainstream news, they're covering it, but like I didn't see any people in hysteria. I didn't see interviews like just from the webpage or Facebook. Like honestly, like until this stream, like you're the first people I've heard that are freaked out by it. Like I haven't seen like a bunch of people posting on Facebook or anywhere. Like you're the first person I've heard that seems freaked out by this. Like JF said, like this is serious. Take this seriously. This could be, but like JF didn't seem freaked out. The people in his chat didn't seem freaked out. Like you're saying, like on 4chan or a few places, or you had to do like deep search to find like some like random small chat room somewhere where people are freaked out about this. Or you're saying like Doooovid, you just don't know, like and really like a whole bunch of people are freaked out over this.
Well, two friends that really can see through a lot of bullshit, whose predictions on a number of things and ability to read the tea leaves I've tested out for now 3 years, who usually get things right, are extremely nervous. And if they're extremely nervous and their track record of getting these things right is extremely high, and they look at the evidence very carefully on everything and have a good bullshit detectors, if they're nervous, I'm nervous.
Well, I mean, because it's a different karma, encompasses everything, but just a comparison, like we talked, like a few weeks ago, like killing Solomon, like okay, like people were pretty freaked out. There were protests, like killing Solomon, and like now it just came in the news that 34 U.S. soldiers have brain damage from the bomb that landed, or something that wasn't felt immediately, and like we could, God forbid, be on the brink of like nuclear war, World War III, and so I've heard possibly from like saying that no, this virus is a way bigger deal than Trump killing Solomon. Like okay, like you could come up with theories that like possibly like escalation to World War III and we're all going to die, and Russia's going to launch all of her nuclear bombs or something. But saying like from a practical level, the likelihood of this Chinese virus turning into a mass casualty event is probably much higher than any recent mass casualty event in history. You're saying, then Jennifer's saying like all these scares, like the the West Nile and SARS and Ebola or whatever, where they fear mongered that this could be a mass casualty event. Is that going off again to like really those could have been mass casualty events? West Nile, SARS, or Ebola, God forbid, could have led to the mass casualty events where millions, tens of millions of people died, but it was because of effective government containment and programs that it didn't lead to that. Which would seem to go against what you're saying, or just so happened that people were paranoid over those things for no reason. But like this one, like evidence-wise, is a lot worse than those ones.
Well, in
I'm just saying-
2014, we brought Ebola patients into Dallas and New Jersey. That could have gotten really out of control. We should not have brought a single goddamn Ebola patient here. We've been lucky. We've avoided much worse disasters through
That's
items
what you're saying. Evidence like no, maybe doing
the lives of the people of this country are not to be thrown away just because we need to keep the goddamn GDP up or whatever else is going on. We don't have rulership that cares about the people who live here, and we're lucky we haven't had worse disasters.
You're just going, you're saying rambles, but it's saying like, no, in America, we value freedom. We don't close the borders because people are dying. We value our freedom. That's the essential American characteristic. And you're saying like, no, like, okay, one person's dying and therefore everyone can't cross the border. That's not the way America works.
I just wanted to jump in real quick and talk about, the one thing that's interesting either way, Doovid, whether it ends up being an actual thing or a nothing burger, I think it's an interesting study in social psychology just because of the sort of, it's a kind of a hysteria that it comes on in grips polls sometimes where people just get so paranoid about these new things that, oh, it's a happening. And I just find it interesting to study sort of this mass hysteria phenomenon. So regardless of the outcome, it'll be interesting to see whether people's fears were justified. But are you aware that there are 35 million people under quarantine currently? That doesn't seem like a standard protocol.
In China?
Yes, that's correct. 35 million people are under quarantine.
I thought it was almost getting closer to 50.
Yeah,
that's possible. I'm just going based on a Quartz article that I've just shared in the chat that says China's mass coronavirus quarantine was impossible to get right. And according to this, that there's 35 million residents that are affected by this quarantine, but it could have increased since then. It's hard to know what's valid out of there.
I mean, if you're doing research right now, or we got to wait next week, or you're saying like, God forbid, we're all going to be dead by next week.
I'm not saying we're all going to be dead. What I'm saying is that whether or not this turns into something
in history. You're saying
I'm just saying it's a big quarantine and that it's interesting that they're doing this and that there's a lot of information and reports coming out of different sources. So it'll be interesting. Like, that's why I want to study it now so that I can compare it to what it ends up being and compare the two and get more metadata out of it in terms of human psychology. That's why I'm more interested in it. And obviously it's a public health concern. So I want to be aware of it as it develops.
I don't know. I mean, you have to look up, I could Google if we really cared. I was trying to get off the subject. It wasn't that interesting to me, but if I needed to do research, you have to look like what were the biggest quarantines in history. I know the plague came back in India, and there might have been mass quarantine maybe in China in the past. There's been mass quarantines, or maybe not. Maybe this is like an unprecedented phenomenon, and so to me, it's still the evidence building phase of it, and it hasn't hit me enough to do enough research, and I thought there was an interesting dynamic from the believer's perspective versus the hysteria of a non-believer. So if you're a believer, it's like, okay, karma's karma, and if I have good karma, good things are going to happen to me. I have bad karma, bad things are going to happen to me. And in essence, all you could do is surrender to higher forces, but the atheist kind of will to survive. They say no, I'm really worried because I'm worried this could be the end.
Are you calling me an atheist, Doovid?
No, because you don't seem to be hysterical.
Yeah, I'm interested in studying the hysteria and hopefully mitigating it.
Non-believers than believers.
That might actually be an interesting thing to study, whether there's any connection between how people react to tragedies like this and religiosity. But I don't think being religious means you lie down in the face of danger and just take it because it's your quote karma. I think being taking precautions, being careful, and defending yourself against preventable disease is pretty rational.
Hysteria, that may be true, but you were talking about hysteria. You're saying, like, if you accept your karma, if you're religious by nature, and there's a connection between being religious and accepting your karma, there's probably also a connection to not being hysterical.
Possibly, yeah. That's actually a very interesting question. I wonder if there's some way we can study that. I've got a link here that I just put in the chat from the Washington Post, and it's saying unprecedented Chinese quarantine could backfire. So what I did was Googled largest quarantine in human history, and it says here in the article, China's quarantine of more than 35 million people, almost certainly the largest in modern public health history, is surprising and troubling experts who say such drastic restrictions rarely work and often backfire. So I'm not sure there. Maybe
it could be overreaction. It could be like in China, they're like Gandalf there. It's like in America, you're saying we value freedom. It's like, all the gun shootings and like whatever, that's the price of freedom. I'm sorry there was another shooting. I'm sorry people are dying. But like, no, you will not take my freedoms away. I don't care how many people die. So, China is more kind of aligned to like, like a world like Gandalf is talking about. And it could be like, yeah, it's just like, someone in the health administrative there in charge is like Gandalf, and he's just overreacting, and a bunch of people are being, have their freedoms taken away for very little health benefit or protection.
Well, the one thing Chinese are, their weakness in terms of their bureaucracy is that everyone cheats and lies, especially with the kind of incentive structure set up by the Communist Party to advance in various local and municipal and I guess regional jurisdictions and the various career paths. So, I mean, it's hard to know who's telling the truth. I mean, this is one reason that, China's going to struggle to contain this. I mean, everyone's trying to cheat the system, even though there's a virus trying to kill them all, I guess, or something. So, I mean, China has problems with trust. I mean, in a European society, properly governed by Europeans, we could probably manage this a lot better with science and legitimate political authority, neither of which we have right now.
Okay, so Doooovid, did you want to wrap up the stream? We've been going for about almost 4 hours now, so probably a good time to say goodnight to everybody. I guess there's one thing left. We've got the word of the week with Brooke, so I will play that video real quick. Doooovid, did you want to say goodbye before I play?
Just because we talked about this so long, I'm looking at the wiki page on like death totals of epidemics, and like in Europe, Asia, Africa, 20th century, you have the 6th Chlorea pandemic that says over 800,000 people were killed in the 1950s to 1926. I can't even read this. Like 1.5 million people died. The Spanish flu, influenza, supposedly, in the time of World War II, killed as many as 100 million people. HIV/AIDS is estimated to have killed 30 million people. 15,000 people died from a smallpox outbreak in India in 1974. Some of the 21st century China had a SARS outbreak 2 different times. One time over 700 people died. One time 350 people died. Zimbabwe had a cholera outbreak where over 4,000 people died. Flu panic 2009, they say over 200,000 people died. So it could be relatively, like, there could be what to worry. There's a reason all the news is putting into it. But I think you have to wait and see. And usually the way people's fear mechanism works is they investigate things as it becomes pertinent to them. So your average person, thinks they're more likely to get done in from other things than a pandemic. But in those situations, it causes people to start studying and looking into it. So we'll see. If next week we're still talking about it. Thanks for doing this. like I wanted to do more slides in the physics, but I guess that's fine. And we had Vince on, and that Gandalf, and so we're finding that some of our regular guests have certain areas of topics that they like talking about again and again. So we'll have to find how we're going to push that in the week in review, and how we're going to use like what does it mean to make progress in terms of the week in review for updates of regular guests who have their own ideas that they're pushing. So hopefully we'll get a more easy flow to the show. I'm looking forward to being on Adam Green this week. I might do maybe a stream on my channel, either a public study session or Ask the Rabbi, maybe a post show. Hope streaming is good. I like the direction we're talking more science. I think that's good. Just keep it informative and educational in the venue to be most likely to be able to push forward these ideas and understand them better.
Yeah, thanks, Doovid. I appreciate it. We got Josh Randall in the chat who said that this was a really stimulating stream. So on the whole, I do think the streams are getting better. And if we want to improve them even more, I guess my suggestion would be to come back to the same subjects, but with new information, as well as look at narrative framing a little bit more rather than just facts occurring in isolation, to try to look at things within a greater narrative context, as well as opportunity to sort of bring back these more abstract themes like quantum mind as often as possible to really tie it all together into a cogent plot, because we all know
I had
how
thoughts on that. We got so sidetracked, because like you're talking Halsey and JF. I had a bunch of thoughts on the micro to macro that we were discussing during the show, but maybe it pays to just table that till a different time, because we didn't have a clear kind of like table of contents of flow between the different topics tonight.
Yeah, awesome. Maybe that's something we can look at doing, like throughout the week. I could make a list of topics and we could sort of brainstorm it and talk about how we want to structure the show, and maybe give specific amounts of times to the different subjects so that things don't turn into huge digressions like they sometimes tend to. I really found it interesting. Honestly, everything we talked about today, I was totally into it. So I really appreciate it. I hope that the audience appreciated it as well. And we'll look forward to the next episode. Gandalf, did you have any closing words before we go to the word of the week?
Oh, this was a really great show. I always find it stimulating. I enjoy hard-hitting debate. I think it's fun. I like exploring ideas, and yeah, maybe I like going on some of my rants every once in a while, I guess. I don't know if the audience seems to find it entertaining, but I think it's important to continue to have high-level, sophisticated discussions. I mean, this culture is starving for it because the sterility and decadence and stupidity is simply out of control. And so in order to get through it, the only way I think, at least I know how to get through it, is just to plow right through it like a bulldozer. And that's what I'm going to do.
Thanks for coming on, Gandalf. So I guess we'll say goodbye to you guys, and I'll just play the last video and just wrap up the show if you guys want to head out. Thank you so much for joining. Really appreciate it. And to the audience, I will play this video. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about my accepted means of imparting testimony, because this this idea kind of came up today, and we didn't really conclude it, but I think it's important. So I'll give a couple words on that right after the video. And Doovid, did you want to stick around, or did you want to say goodnight?
Well, I could pop on. I guess if you wanted to keep talking and go back to like the quantum mind or something, or it doesn't matter. So like if you're just going to do that and then monologue out and want to clarify to the audience whatever thoughts in your mind, that's fine. Or if you did want to return and go back and talk about some of these concepts. I mean, we have our guests and it's interesting, and but it seems like the topics that we talk about are different than the topics that our regular guests talk about. So either way is fine. Like we talk about these all the time. We could table it till a later date.
Yeah, I was definitely looking forward to going over those quantum physics slides, but I think because of having Vincent on right away, we never really got to it. But we'll definitely make time for it next week. I want to be able to give it my full attention, so it's probably better to wait till next week.
Because it wasn't the slides I was thinking, it was really to your talk on Halsey and your talk like JF and evidence. And JF's kind of like, what happens on the quantum level? Why should that affect biology? And I mean, there's some, talk about like the weak forces and the strong force, the nuclear forces, they only have an effect on a small level. And therefore, like, no, they wouldn't affect the quantum advancements in quantum sciences wouldn't necessarily affect biology, except for entanglement. And the concept of entanglement could potentially affect everything on the larger level. And that's why Hameroff and the mechanism of the tubules to use this force of entanglement and possibly trigger our nerve cells. And the thought about this, that what does that mean? So I think we should focus on talking about that more. And that was an angle on the show with JF, and continue to try to what does it mean to have predictions of how this quantum mind and quantum effects will affect larger scale items. And so that's a subject that requires definitely more talk. And I think that like a certain aspect we should try to push forward on that every week, every show, regardless of the other things we talk about. But we've already had a long show, good show, so I'll sign off, and but I'll follow the clip, and whatever you monologue or feels important to share with the audience, I'll possibly, depending how long you do it, listen tonight or catch it tomorrow.
Thanks so much, Doovid. Really appreciate it. And we'll make sure to make time for those quantum physics slides on the next week in review. I really look forward to it. And hopefully in time, the other members of the participating panel will be as interested as I am in quantum mechanics. One can hope. All right, so here's our word of the week with Rook.
Not becoming president, I imagine he said something like, if you're running in 2020 against Trump, it's going to be very difficult as a woman. Take it from me. So I can imagine him saying something like that, which is, of course, entirely accurate and non-offensive in the slightest. But I don't think he's a crypto misogynist, crypto patriarchalist, or whatever. But I think
crypto, a combining word form meaning hidden, secret, used in the formation of compound words. In ecology, crypsis is the ability of an animal to avoid observation or detection by other animals. It may be a predation strategy or an anti-predator adaptation. Methods include camouflage, nocturnality, subterranean lifestyle, and mimicry. Crypsis can involve visual, olfactory, such as pheromones, or auditory concealment. In the popular vernacular, the prefix added to the beginning of a word crypto infers that the person being referred to is presenting themselves as something other than what they truly are. For example, when someone is alleged to be a crypto-communist, the implication is that they are a communist presenting themselves as something else.
And we're back. Hope you enjoyed that. I've got a one last thing to show before we wrap the show up, which is my rather lengthy article about how to validate testimony in my own opinion. So I'll share that with the chat if anyone wants to take a look at that. It's a bit of a long article. It's over 4,000 words, but it's worth having a look at, especially if you're interested in establishing your testimony as authoritative, if you're interested in seeing what other people have said historically about validation of testimony. It's actually it's a non-trivial matter, which means it's a complicated matter. So there's historically lots of different schools, from Charvaka all the way to Vedanta, later school. So they have all sorts of different methods that they validate testimony. And so I've shown as well what methods I accept to validate testimony. So it'd be very useful for people who want to get deeper into the teachings to have a look at this article, just to see what I accept and why. And also for an opportunity for people to look at their own standards of evidence, because we all have to defer to authority at some point. So appeal to authority is not always a fallacy, because there's always the appeal to the authority of something, even if it's just formal logic or the scientific method, things that we tend to take for granted, but we shouldn't, because people aren't sometimes mischaracterizing the scientific method or misrepresenting the results of the scientific method. So we always have to take a look. We always have to take that step back and really ask ourselves whether the data is telling us what we want it or what we think it's telling us. So this is a good start for anyone who's unfamiliar with what it is that I do. And hopefully there's some enjoyment to be had from that article, even though it is a little bit long, I admit, but I just wanted to make sure that I got all the information in there. So thank you again for the comments in the chat. They seem to be getting better, and I really appreciate that, especially when people are talking about the stuff that we're talking about on the stream. It makes it easier and more interactive and a lot more fun for everybody. So thanks so much to the regular commenters. Really appreciate your contributions. I will look forward to seeing you next Sunday at the latest. Bye-bye for now.